Hi. Ciao, Francesca. Is too still?
Much better, Alberto.
Oh, I turned off the light.
Non c'è lo sfondo, però ti si vede almeno.
Well,
now you're back to earth, Alberto. It's okay. We recognize you.
all right. And Gary, this is Francesca De Cagno, a trainer at the Institute that is going to help me for anything that needs to be done.
Okay, everyone, we need to start soon, so I'm going to have to mute some of you.
Okay.
It is a great pleasure to be with you today, and I give a warm thank you to your leader, our leader, Levi Bautista, the president of the Conference of NGOs, for inviting me to be an honorary co-chair. I'm very pleased to do so and to connect with so many of you who care and work with. It is a great pleasure to be with you United Nations. And I give a warm thank you to your leader, our leader, just a moment, Levi Bautista, to 1945, the Conference of NGOs, for inviting me to be an honorary co-chair. There were then about 100, and to connect United Nations, and I give a warm thank you to your leader, our leader, just a moment, Levi Bautista, in 1948.
We're working on the feedback, so can you please kindly be patient?
It is a great pleasure to be with you today, and I give a warm thank you to your leader, our leader, Levi Bautista, the president of the Conference of NGOs, for inviting me to be an honorary co-chair. I'm very pleased to do so and to connect with so many of you who care and work with. It is a great pleasure to be with you today. And I give a warm thank you to your leader, for just a moment, Levi Bautista, to 1945, when the Conference of NGOs, for inviting me to be an honorary co-chair. There were then about 100 It is a great pleasure to be with you today, and I give a warm thank you to your leader, our leader, Levi Bautista, the president of the Conference of NGOs, for inviting me to be an honorary co-chair. I'm very pleased to do so and to connect with so many of you who care and work with and for the United Nations. I want to look back for just a moment in history to 1945, when the UN Charter was drafted in San Francisco. There were then about 100 observers, now called NGOs, who mostly sat at the edge of the room and listened. And just 3 years later, in 1948, as the UN was still seeking its permanent home, the Conference of NGO was founded. Fast forward to today, 75 years later, we gather again with different backgrounds, races, religions, nationalities, but joined in our shared vision of making a better world, of knowing that we can do more together than we can do alone, and knowing that the issues we care about connect us across borders, including human rights and social justice and development and peace and security, and so much more. We know that diplomats play a key role, but they cannot succeed without wide public understanding and support. So here, we joined forces, we engaged with the UN and the decision-making process. So we mark 75 years of the Conference of NGOs. Let us mobilize and galvanize our Conference of NGO constituency and celebrate this milestone of cooperation and interaction of civil society and the UN. And let us look to the future with hope and determination as we work evermore to make a better world. I'm honored to join you every step of the way. And on to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Gillian. It is my honor to be co-chair with you for the CoNGO 75th Anniversary Committee. It is with great pride to see the 75th anniversary celebration slated for the entire year of 2023, moving along so well. Over 1,000 NGO representatives joined CoNGO in the first of 6 global webinars focused on achieving social justice, especially racial justice, migration justice, and health justice. Since its founding in 1948, CoNGO has been a significant force in bringing to the United Nations an NGO force and voice to that agency, and has always done that with great distinction. Thank you.
Excellencies, civil society colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Gillian, and Patrick, for the greetings. As some of you, if not most of you know, Gillian Sorensen was the Assistant Secretary General for External Relations at the United Nations and well loved by civil society representatives. And General Patrick Ray is the Emeritus Grand Master of the Ordo Supremus Militaris Templi Hierae Solomitani, the Knights Templar of the Order of Jerusalem, OSMTH. Thank you for the greetings on behalf of your co-chairship of the 75th anniversary of CoNGO. Welcome to the 4th CoNGO Global Thematic Webinar on Substantive Issues. I'm Liberato Bautista, the president of CoNGO. Thank you for including us in this webinar as a part of your day, wherever you are in the world, this minute and this very day. It's a blessed and good day to focus on crucial and urgent issues confronting people and the planet. Today, we focus on peace, on human security and sustainability of people and the planet. It is a special day because this webinar is brought to you by CoNGO and 2 wonderful collaborators, the World Academy of Art and Science and the Campaign on Human Security for All, which is a partnership between the United Nations Human Security Fund and the World Academy. CoNGO is an international NGO in general consultative status with the United Nations. We are a conferential body comprised of more than 600 NGOs variedly accredited across the United Nations system, but mainly with ECOSOC consultative status. CoNGO was founded in 1948, and this year we are celebrating our 75th anniversary. And this thematic webinar you are attending is one of 6 we are holding this year. And that's exactly what the webinars have been about. It started with the Civil Society Summit on Substantive Issues in October 2021, attended by over 1,000 participants. That summit produced a synthesis report, which resulted in an action of the CoNGO General Assembly in December 2021 to follow up the 6 summit themes with 6 thematic webinars. Webinar 1 was on social justice, focusing mainly on migration justice, on racial justice, and health justice. Webinar 2 dealt with the pursuit of global justice and solidarity, focusing on the achievement of Agenda 2030, on sustainable development, and on humanitarian action. Last week, the 3rd webinar focused on gender justice, on youth and intragenerational and intergenerational justice and solidarity for future generations. Between the summit and the 3 webinars, we have reached about 2,000 participants from civil society, UN member states, UN officials, and staff from around the world. Because of our commitment to gender equality and gender justice, I'm happy to report back to you that the total of all our speakers and moderators and rapporteurs, we had 63% women and 37% men of all our speakers and moderators and rapporteurs. Of these speakers, 16% were young people below 30, which is also a commitment to the youth of the present and of the future generations. We have also brought these webinars in 4 languages: English, Arabic, French, and Spanish. Also a commitment of CoNGO to linguistic diversity and linguistic justice. CoNGO's principal mandate is to ensure that NGOs accredited to the UN have all the necessary access to the premises and promises of the United Nations. By leveraging our convening capacity as a conferential body, CoNGO provides a platform for the voice and agency of civil society and NGOs to permeate those premises, physical spaces, and promises, the substantive agenda of the United Nations. By premises, I meant the physical spaces for consultations, collaboration, and cooperation, such as this webinar. By premises, I mean the substantive issues that pursue the pillars of the United Nations system: human dignity and human rights, peace and security, sustainable development and human progress, and harmonious relations of nations under the rule of law. Intrinsic to these pillars is the promise of the United Nations to pursue peace and human security, and to promote human dignity and protect human life for the flourishing of human life and that of planetary integrity. Today's webinar is about these and more. And I am excited by the distinguished speakers we are bringing to you at this webinar. As I said last week in webinar 3, human security and planetary sustainability are at stake. If national and multilateral budgets are a statement of our moral bearings, we are in deep moral deficit today, because we fund more war than fund more for peace. And the things that make for peace and human flourishing are lacking the necessary funds. The life-giving work needs funding by national and multilateral mechanisms and institutions. CoNGO's organizational mantra over the years since 2008, and it antedates the discussion of the future at the UN, has been defining the present, shaping the future, and making the change now. Therefore, we have also made that mantra the overriding theme of the 6 global thematic webinars. The added emphasis is to make the change now. This is what we endeavor to identify today at this webinar. We will define the present, yes. We will shape the future, we must. But more urgent and pressing are the changes we are willing to identify and are going to make. What changes are we willing to make and do so that peace, human security, and sustainability for people and the planet do not linger as empty words in national and multilateral texts, but come alive and visible in our human and social relations as much as in our planetary life and ecological systems. Today's webinar, as is the entire series of webinars, is designed to weigh in on multilateral discussions at the United Nations related to the United Nations Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, the SDG Summit, the Summit of the Future next year, the new Peace Agenda, and so much more. Excellencies, civil society colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we meet today in not so many eves before the United Nations General Assembly convenes. Let's send a message loud and clear. Let's hear what our speakers have to say, and then get your social media outlets barraged with the good messages urging member states, the United Nations system, with calls for peace, for human security, and sustainability for people and the planet. We have the social media accounts on the QR code that's been screened, and on every slide that you will see, there will be the QR code. And so let's go on with the webinar. Please make sure that if you need interpretation, you click the button which says interpretation. Please be aware of the etiquette for holding a webinar. Please mute yourselves unless you are scheduled to speak. I'll give that 30 seconds for people to read quickly. I hope that all participants who have questions, please post them on Q&A. None of us will be moderating the chat, but the chat except our rapporteurs. Our rapporteurs are intentional listeners, and they will be checking the chat for possible comments that will be fielded to the moderator. The moderators will have the responsibility to choose which question, if there is, to field to their panelists. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like now to introduce to you a remark from Gary Jacobs, the President and CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science and the Executive Chair of the Human Security for All campaign. I must say, Gary and the members and the fellows of the World Academy of Art and Science present here, it's been an honor, a little bit over 2 years now, to be myself a WAS fellow. Gary, you have the screen.
Liberato, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for inviting us to partner with CoNGO for this very important event. And my congratulations on this, the 75th anniversary of CoNGO. And the topics you have chosen for the 6 webinars this year are certainly extremely relevant and very important to the work that we're doing and that the world needs to be doing at this time. And I'm particularly happy to be invited to partner with you on this webinar, which covers the themes and the interlinkage between peace, human security, and sustainable development. WAS was founded in 1960 by eminent intellectuals and scientists concerned about the social responsibility of those in the field of knowledge for how knowledge is applied in society. And we've been working for 60 years now on strategies to see how that knowledge can be better used. In 2021, WAS partnered with CoNGO on a survey of CoNGO members on the subject of human security. This was done in collaboration with the United Nations Trust Fund on Human Security. And then later in the year, in October, I was invited as a speaker at the CoNGO Civil Society Summit on Substantive Issues, in which I spoke about our proposal to work with the United Nations on what we called HS4A, a campaign on human security for all. And it's these previous events that are the reason that I and a number of my colleagues, many of my colleagues, are present here today to participate in this important event. The HS4A was launched in January of 2023 at an unlikely place at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, before an audience of about 120,000 leading business leaders and technology leaders from around the world, including the largest technology companies in the world that we all are associated with in one way or another. Over the last 8 months, we've been working intensively with a wide variety of groups in the world, from interfaith groups. Liberato was the host of a very interesting event with interfaith groups from all over the world, which we partnered with on human security in January. EarthX, the very large environmental expo that takes place annually. The Sustainable Development Solutions Network, particularly our partners in Europe. The Inter-Academy panel of about 140 national academies. IPU, which is the Inter-Parliamentary Union of 170 plus parliaments of the world, which we're working with now, and others that are coming up in CoNGO Week, just a couple of a short time from now. And I mentioned that only to give you a background that the message that we would like to share and learn and interact with you on today is a message we feel it's relevant and important to everybody in the world, regardless of the sector, regardless of our professions, regardless of the work we do. And that's the message of human security. And as also a member of ECOSOC, we are dedicated and committed to do what we can in partnership with CoNGO and other organizations like this to enhance the impact of the UN agenda for Agenda 2030. And that's where human security, we feel, plays an important role. That was not supposed to happen. This seminar is going to look closely at the association between peace and human security and sustainability. And I think we all agree that peace is an absolutely essential basis and condition for human security. But peace, as it's narrowly interpreted, is no longer a sufficient standard for governing relations between nations. Human security is a broader concept that includes meeting all of the essential conditions for stability and a secure peace in society and for the people of the planet. The concept of human security was first introduced by the UNDP in their 1994 Human Development Report, and we're very fortunate today, as one of our keynote speakers, to have the former deputy administrator of UNDP to share with us her views on this, on the development of this concept. My colleagues will elaborate on the scope and content of the work that we're doing with the UN on human security, but I'd just like to mention a few critical points that tie into the whole conference. One is that human security is a cross-cutting theme. It relates to all of the issues that we're addressing in Agenda 2030, all the 17 SDGs. But it's also a common denominator. It's an intersecting point that connects all these dimensions together in their planetary environment as dimensions of life for the planet, as dimensions of our lives as human beings. Human security does one more thing. It personalizes the message on planetary health and makes it relevant to every human being on the planet. And this is one of the things we think is really necessary now. The countries of the world, 193 countries, have done a marvelous job of assembling and negotiating the SDGs and 169 targets, and of getting commitments from countries to work on them. But I think, as we all know now, the formulation and commitment is not been sufficient to really ensure the implementation that we need to really meet this agenda on time. And we think one of the things that's been missing is we've not yet been able to get, in spite of all the efforts and communication, we've not yet been able to get the agenda, the message down and personalize it in a way that's meaningful to everybody on Earth. And that's where human security comes in. When we talk about planet, when we talk about climate change, we all understand the magnitude and its significance of this. It's the greatest crisis we've ever met. I hope we're not failing, but ever faced in humanity. And yet for the average citizen, the vast majority don't really think it's their business and don't really understand what the implications are for them. But when you look at climate change in terms of health, for example, every person on the planet is going to be affected ultimately by the climate change unless we do something radically to stop it. And so this effort to personalize the message and make it relevant to everybody is part of the mission of HS4A. We are eager to explore with you the interface between peace, and we're going to have a wonderful session on that with some of our colleagues, with sustainable development issues, and with the actual impact that these two very important things have on everybody on Earth. I look forward to participating in this and thank all of you who are contributing your time and your thought to help us in this work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Let us now move to the keynote speeches. But before I do that, let me remind you, as I have seen on chat, that you set your interpretation button to original audio so that you will hear the original language spoken by the speaker. Don't put English, use original interpretation, and you only switch to another language aside from English when the original speaker speaks in that language. And certainly Minister Solano, I believe, will be speaking in Spanish, and that is where those who do not speak the language will then click English rather than the original interpretation. So may I now call on Dr. Alberto Zucconi, the president of the Person-Centered Approach Institute. Alberto, you worked with Carl Rogers way back on this person-centered approach, and he is also the chair of the Board of Trustees of the World Academy of Art and Science and the Secretary General of the World University Consortium. Alberto, you have the screen.
Thank you, Liberato, and a happy 75th anniversary to Congo. Well, thank you to the keynote speaker for being here today and sharing their thoughts on this important issue. As a moderator, I remind the people that have their address in this panel that we are a little late already. So please limit yourself to 7 minutes. I had 5 minutes allotted. I'll try to do much better than that to have some time for some question. Also, thank you to Cyril and Janani for being our super effective rapporteur. Well, what I want to share is that I'm really convinced that without peace, there is no human security. And without peace and human security, there cannot be sustainability, not only for the people, but for the living organism in our planet. What we need to do? Well, I really like what Albert Einstein, one of our founder of the Academy, is that we cannot manage the problems created by all the form of thinking, applying the same thinking that really created the problems. So nowadays, I think we are becoming aware, the United Nations including, which I really applaud, that to be effective, also thanks to having learned from the mistake of the past, we need to empower people. We need to involve all the stakeholders to work together and aim to the common goal of protecting and promoting peace, human security, and sustainability. And that means not to have speeches, but it means to have a daily commitment in our life. And for example, on peace, I'm convinced that peace had to start from making peace with the different part of ourselves. Often we are at war with ourselves. And being able to make peace and diffuse conflict in our homes, with our friends, with our colleagues, with our co-workers, not just with the people in another nation. Because if we make peace with ourselves, we'll be better able to have a sustainable relationship, peaceful, with the people that we love. And often are the people that we tell them, oh, if you really love me, you would change. Not blind to this absurdity that we want to shape the people on our narcissistic wish, or we want to consume any product without worrying what impact on the environment. So I think our challenge is, thanks also to the new development also in the United Nations, to promote change with effective means by empowering people and organization around the world, which means making them more responsible, and being aware that peace, human security, and sustainability are interlinked and is an adventure that includes the cognitive, the emotional, the social, the scientific, and the spiritual and psychological aspect of humanity. I think that we have enough research showing that when we really committed, people, community can make a difference. And so all together now, because the challenge is big, but we can handle it together. So the first speaker, we have Ivan Simonovic, that is the ambassador and permanent representative of the Republic of Croatia to the United Nations in New York. Ivan, 7 minutes.
Mr. Moderator, dear colleagues. Let me be straightforward. Current global trends related to peace, human security, and sustainability of people and planet are negative. There are more conflicts, they last longer, and they are deadlier, including for civilians. The global power relations are changing, which makes conflicts more likely, and the global arms race is on again. All over the world, people feel insecurity. Technological changes undermine job security, increase security risks, and make our future unpredictable. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals slowed, halted, or reversed, and respect for human rights and rule of law are backtracking. Trust in public institutions is declining, and demands for more civic engagement are increasingly met with physical attacks and the use of force. Climate change continues with disastrous consequences for people and the planet. Finally, because of our lifestyle and disrespect of the nature, future pandemics are becoming more likely and deadlier. To respond to rising challenges and uncertainty, to protect and promote peace, human security, and sustainability, better global regulation is becoming increasingly important. However, we are facing a major paradox. The UN, as the most important global regulation instrument, has never been weaker. This almost 80 years old organization should be better adjusted to the changing environment, opportunities, and threat. However, the reform of the United Nations is very difficult to achieve because of its charter provisions requiring 2/3 majority of member states and consensus of all 5 permanent members of the Security Council. However, every crisis is also an opportunity. In conditions of crisis, innovative and radical solutions can be more easily accepted. In the document that some colleagues mentioned, our common agenda, the UN Secretary General listed low-hanging fruit opportunities for the UN's rapid improvement, but he also indicated a need for a vision of long-term desirable transformation of the United Nations. I think that our best chance to move in that direction is the summit of the future envisaged for 2024. To be really successful and to be transformative, what should a new vision of the United Nations look like? Colleagues, we've reached the end of one road and we need to find another. We must not limit ourselves to extinguishing fires. We need a new vision. Besides organizational, we need also radical cultural change in sense of different relationship with other people and nature. We need a horizontal, vertical strengthening of solidarity, as well as the replacement of individual and national egoism and ruthless struggle by more cooperation and compromises. We need more inclusion, tolerance, and human rights, as well as more positive attitude towards the planet Earth and biosphere. We need more vertical solidarity with respect to future generations and greater responsibility for the world we live. Decisions on the local, national, regional, and global level should involve young people as much as possible. Cultural change should also include a shift from uncompromising competition to seeking compromises. Strengthening horizontal solidarity is also necessary both within and between states. This includes reducing economic inequalities, gender parity, and universal availability of services such as health and education, which represent human rights. New technologies in practice create winners and losers. Solidarity between them is prerequisite for social cohesion and success of transition. As far as organizational change is concerned, states should delegate a wider range of their powers to the UN and other global and regional mechanisms. Now, finally, let me say something more about Peace Building Commission, PBC, the body that Croatia chairs this year. Currently, its main task is to support peace-building activities in post-conflict countries and to provide more coherent UN action by advising Security Council and General Assembly and strengthening the peace and development nexus for its bridging role to the Economic and Social Council. The PBC is ideally placed for conflict prevention in general, as well as addressing cross-cutting issues such as climate change, women, youth, future generations, and artificial intelligence. The PBC's role should be strengthened and its mandate enlarged, focusing more broadly on prevention and addressing its root causes. To be able to address root causes, it is essential that the PBC establishes stronger and more systematic links with the World Bank, regional financial institutions, and multilateral development banks. Due to shortage of time, I will also mention that on 22nd of September, we are having a ministerial PBC meeting. It will be the highest level PBC meeting ever, and its deliberations will feed into the preparatory process of the Summit of the Future. Some ideas on the improvement of peace operations will also feed into the peacekeeping review scheduled for 2022. PBC could oversee a new generation of light footprint, civilian, sustainable peace operations aimed to address root causes and prevent conflicts. Dear colleagues, thank you for your attention, and I wish you great success with this highly important conference. All possible reforms that I sketched heavily rely on support of academia as well as of civil society in general. Colleagues, let us work together and be agents of change for a better and more sustainable world.
Thank you, Ambassador Simonovic, and great speech, and great that you kept on the time allotted. So let's rush to the next speaker, Usha Rao Monari, that is the former UN Undersecretary General and UNDP Associate Administration.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Mr. Moderator, thank you very much for your introduction, and to the previous speakers. I listened very, very carefully to the very important connection that has been drawn between peace and development. I want to apologize straight off the bat in case you hear other voices around me, Mr. Moderator, because I'm sitting in an airport waiting for a flight. So please accept my apologies. I will try to be as brief as possible. The link between peace and development actually was presented by the United Nations and many other actors through the Sustainable Development Goals, because frankly, when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, what are they? There's 17 interlinked objectives that represent a shared blueprint for peace, prosperity, for people and planet. That already drew a very important link between peace and security and just sustainable development and prosperity in general. We are now at a point today where the SDG stocktake is going to take place later this year, later this month. But we're at a very, very fragile and fundamental point of human and planetary evolution. We've been through an enormous set of interlinked crises. COVID is one of them, the continuing conflict, climate, other water is coming up as a very important source of potential conflict and insecurity. We are at a point where we have to achieve the SDGs collectively and in aggregate. Otherwise, we will be in a situation in 2030 where the sustainable development pathways that we drew up for ourselves have just not been achieved. I'm an optimist by nature, and I can only say to you that the stock taking will show that while, yes, there has been some backtracking in many of the SDGs, as previous speakers have alluded to, there have been some shining examples of success as well. And I think what the UN and what Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General will want to do is to point to these successes and say, let us build upon them in the pathway to 2030. Part of that renewed stimulus or push towards the achievement of SDGs is the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda. Essentially, Our Common Agenda is to use words a little flippantly, a turbocharge to the achievement of SDGs. It presents basically recommendations that will allow a faster achievement of the 17 SDGs, and their recommendations are in 4 very important linked areas. One, as I think, Mr. Moderator, you alluded to, renewed solidarity and trust between people, between nations, between generations as well. Second, the social contract, a new one based on fundamental human rights. Third, better management of global commons. And fourth, really managing global public goods much more equitably so that everybody benefits and not just a certain part of the world's population. And it comprises principles that the UN follows actually in its daily operations. Leave no one behind is one of those very, very important principles as we go forward. Protect the planet, prevent conflicts to the extent possible, promote peace, etc. Where are we today? I think that my conviction on this is the following. We must increase trust between ourselves, between generations, between nations. You're right, Dr. Bautista, you spoke about the Human Development Report that the UNDP put out. What did we find recently? 6 out of 7 people still today, 2022, 2023, 2024, feel insecure. This is not just political insecurity, we found. It was several levels of insecurity: climate insecurity, water insecurity, food insecurity, and importantly, insecurity of opportunity and choice. And that's why 6 out of 7 people reported they felt insecure. For the first time ever, when we did the report and did the research, 9 out of 10 countries in the world declined in the Human Development Index. This is unprecedented. And it all came down to the situation we're facing now, which is one of fragility, which is one of vulnerability, and which is fraught with conflicts and crises of various sorts. I think the SDG Stocktaking Summit will lay bare some of these, but point a very, very positive future. And the summit of the future, which many of you spoke about next year, will be, if you will, a gathering of people and minds and research and evidence that will indeed show us the way forward to achieve the goals that we have set out for 2030. The OCA is the wind under the sail of the SDGs, but the SDGs is the blueprint that we must all follow. As an optimist, I believe that our best future is still ahead of us, but it will depend on the choices that we make today. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Undersecretary Rao Monari, and have a good flight, and let's fly to peace and human security and sustainability. Now, the third speaker is Lilia Solano, Vice Minister for Dialogue, Equality, and Human Rights from the Republic of Colombia. Please, 7 minutes like the others.
Alberto, we're trying to locate Minister Solano. She may have had problem logging in. Or is she there now? In the interest of time, let's move to the next speaker and get Minister Solano next.
in my list, I have
You're
Vice
right.
Minister Solano as the last speaker.
Then in the interest of time again, let's see if there are any questions, and otherwise we'll keep moving and then get alert panel 2 to insert Minister Solano when she is able to connect.
Yeah, I don't see any, if not, I don't see any question. I don't know if the rapporteur have seen and gathered some question. I guess not. So you can save time and give the Vice Minister, when she arrives, space in another session. Thank you, Liberato.
Thank you,
Thank
Alberto.
you all for this session.
Let's move then to panel 1, and I'd like to call on Dr. Isabella Ban, the Research Fellow in Governance and Global Ethics at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. Isabella, you have the screen. Isabella, if you're there, you're muted. Looks like we're having more problems at this webinar than the previous with check-ins. Oh dear. Hang in there, please. Well, as of a few hours ago, everyone on the of the speakers and moderators were alerted of the time. Let me moderate this panel for now, and thank you to Mr. Hiro Sakurai of the Soka Gakkai International, who will be the rapporteur for this session. Again, Q&A button for questions for this panel. Let me then call on Dr. Phoebe Kunduri, Professor Kunduri of the economics, who is the economics, a professor of economics, I should say, and director of the Rees Laboratory School of Economics at Athens University of Economics. And you can see her distinguished career projected on screen. I noted that Dr. Kunduri will be sharing screen, so we'll enable that. Thank you. The screen, Phoebe.
Thank you very much. And just let me know when I have to conclude. 1 minute before I need to conclude, just let me know. So today I am excited to be here with you, and I'm also very happy that I am able to share some of the work that we do on the sustainability transition and connect the implementation of the SDGs, which is what we define as the transition to sustainability with human security. So in essence, we are in an era of multi-crisis, slow economic growth, inflationary pressures, epidemics and pandemics, climate change, aggravating biodiversity collapse, war, increasing population and inequalities. And we deeply believe, and I hope every single person on this planet is able to acknowledge this, via education, information, and experience that the way to escape the multi-crisis are the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that in effect provide the implementation pathways guidance, our blueprint for the sustainable interaction between natural capital, societal capital, and economic capital in the world. I direct an Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation of IFORIA that includes a number of research institutions and research teams that I lead across Europe, and some technology accelerators, together with accelerators of social and financial innovation. And also I am part of various networks like the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, where I chair the Global Climate Hub and the European and Greek hub of this global network of more than 2,000 institutional members. I am here representing the World Academy of Art and Science, and I will try to give you a glimpse of how we try to connect what we do at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network with the Human Security for All project that the World Academy of Art and Science is leading under the auspices of the United Nations. So the UN Agenda 2030 is basically the Millennium Development Goals plan human security aspects. This gives us the SDGs, the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets within them. The first step to understanding how to implement the SDGs is first to understand that they talk about 6 basic transformations that need to be implemented across the world in each and every country, in each and every region. A transformation in education, health, energy decarbonization, sustainable industry, sustainable food, land, water, and oceans management, sustainable cities and communities, and the digital revolution for sustainable development. And it is crucial to understand that this is a very interdisciplinary, integrated, holistic framework, and all SDGs contribute to each of the 6 transformations, and no SDG is fully implemented without the other SDGs being implemented. And another thing to know, or at least another thing that I am deeply confident about, is that if we cannot measure the performance against the SDGs, we cannot manage them and we cannot improve them. And if you look at the figure that I have on the left-hand side of my slide, you can see that there is progress with regards to the implementation of the SDGs. It has been slowed down during the COVID era, but we definitely do not have the pace of progress that we need. We are on a trajectory as indicated by the blue line, whereas we need a trajectory indicated by the green line. Every year, a Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which has a hub in each and every country in the world and has 3 headquarters, one in New York, one in Europe, the one that I direct, and one in Kuala Lumpur. Every year since 2015, we've been measuring progress against the SDGs. And we have done this for each and every country in the world. And you can see the darker blue color means better progress with regards to implementing the SDGs, where the lighter blue means less progress. And if you go into the report, which is electronic, is digital, and it's fully open access, you can find information about each country, the level of performance for each SDG, SDG, each of the 169 targets within the SDGs, and each indicator that we use about 250 KPIs, and you can also find access to the models we use to project the trend with regards to 2030 deadline and how will be the performance of each and every country for each and every SDG in 2030 if we keep the same the scenario as the business as usual scenario. And we do that for Europe as well. We have a report for Europe and the Balkans, and we in these reports, again, we indicate the level of performance. Red means really bad, diverging from the goal. Orange means facing significant challenges. Yellow means facing challenges, and green means already on track of achieving the targets. And you can see the arrows there, which indicate trends to 2030 in terms of implementation of the targets. And we do that for each and every country. While you're downscaling, it's much easier to use the wealth of data that are available at different scales. So for the global report, we use less data because we have to have the data for each and every country. When you downscale, you can use more and more data. And you can see how the whole thing is measured with different KPIs for each SDG. We measure a leave no one behind index, which is very important for human security, a spillover index, which shows the effect, positive and negative, of each and every country on other countries. And we indicate explicitly how this spillover index and leave no one behind index are calculated. We are even calculating the SDG-based measurement of countries' impacts on the global common using value chains of products using thorough flow-based accounting. So, for example, we can tell you how much of deforestation in Brazil is attributed to the production of agricultural products consumed outside Brazil, and this is embodied in trade. So, we can even downscale even more than the national level. This is the example of Greece with regards to the different regions within the country. This is very important because we know where we stand, we know where to go, and we can plan, we can develop investment and policy strategies and financial instruments that can support these investments that are SDG guided. So you have a financial stimulus that can really facilitate the implementation of the SDGs. Now, human security, it's really decomposed into economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, personal security, community security, and political security. And what we did in a recent publication, and I should be concluding, I guess, in 2 minutes, is that we've collected all the different reports that measure, together with our SDG reports under the United Nations Sustainable Development Network, that measure the different aspects of human security. So I also refer to the Human Development Report, the Global Peace Index, the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, the Fragile States Index, the Global Risk Report, Ecological Threat Report, Food Security and Nutrition in the World. And what we actually did was try to collect all these different aspects of human security, the reports that measure all these different aspects of human security, and integrate them into one overall index. And then at the end, so here are the Human Development Index the Human Development Index versus the gross national income per capita. So you can see a positive relationship between the two. The planetary pressures across against the gross national income per country, again a positive relationship. The Human Development Index for male and females, and also other matrices that have to do with economic and food security using the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, the political security using the Corruption Perception Index, the food security using FAO's report on the state of food security and nutrition, the personal security, which uses Fragile States Index, and the Global Peace Index, again for personal security, Environmental Performance Index, Wealth Health Statistics Report for the health security, Global Risk Report for economic, environmental, and personal security, Democracy Report for political and community security, and Global Terrorism Index for personal and community security. And I will share my PowerPoint. All these indexes are laid out in this PowerPoint. At the end of the day, what we did was and this is my final slide, to cross-map the SDG performance with the different human security indexes and see how much content of each of the different 17 SDGs are there to support the other human security indexes. And in this way, we identify how the SDG framework can further support in a very explicit and transparent way each layer of human security. There is a lot of data and analysis in this paper and forthcoming report, and I hope it will be used for policymaking and investment decisions across the globe and within nations. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Koundoury, for a very comprehensive presentation. To our participants, once the webinar is over, we will clean up and edit the entire webinar, and you will have access to the entire proceedings of the webinar, including going back and reviewing the important slides shared by Professor Koundoury. Just a note to you, Vice Minister Solano has been summoned to the office by the minister with whom she works, and was promised that she will join us once she is finished with the meeting with the minister in the government of Colombia. Let us now move to our next speaker, Donato Kiniger Pasilli, who is the Vice President of the World Academy of Art and Science and the co-chair of the Human Security for All campaign. Donato is joining us from Italy. Donato, you have the screen.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you also hear my voice. Do you? Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
Very well. I have nothing to show except my face, I hope, but to come up with comments on, I mean, some ideas, let's say, flag some comments on what we have been hearing, and principally focus on the core messages of human security and the relevance of human security to the SDGs. This is what I've been asked to tackle in my very few minutes. First of all, Liberato, I want to thank you for the initiative. It's really timely, your event. It offers us the possibility of linking with our genuine partners, the civil society that is core to the campaign of human security. This Human Security for All campaign, Gary already spoke about that, that we are running now almost for 1 year, that had a very long gestation, maybe over 2 years, and that is also the byproduct, I would like to say, of a previous experiment or partnership with the United Nations system on leadership development. Now we are partnering with the unit, the New York unit on human security, that is the legitimate representative at UN of with a UNDP, as it was remarked before, of this particular subject. Although this embraces all the full spectrum of the United Nations activities, and I would say of international debate and of multilateral relations. Liberato, you have placed at some point in your presentation the reference to our common agenda by the current Secretary General, Gutierrez. And I think this is extremely relevant to start our discussion, because as this common agenda produced a couple of years ago, still has a particular purpose, that is to respond to the lack of systemic approaches to crisis situations. And when we talk about human security, we respond to the need of people, to the fear of people in front of growing insecurity. So this is particularly relevant. And some points have been mentioned already by the previous speakers, the representative from UNDP, when, and I want to enhance and to remark this point, when she said one of the main areas is renewed solidarity. One of the main areas of our concern is renewed solidarity. This is probably the main point of our attempt to really re-engineer a new multilateral system that is not exclusively based on a state-centric approach, but that generally includes representatives of the civil society. So it is true, as it is said in the common agenda, that it is necessary to accelerate the implementation of various multilateral agreements. It is true, as we heard, that we don't have to leave no one behind. We have to protect our planet, but in particular, we have to protect the citizens of the planet, I would like to say. And we have also to build trust. This is another very important principle of our common agenda. Build trust among the civil society itself and member states. What we have not been able to attain until now. So that will be probably through reforms. Yes, it could be also through reforms, but it has also to go through in French you say prise de conscience, a new sense of ownership for what is the general interest, for what is the real core interest to people. That is, as we said, as we were saying before, the security, and here we have the syllogism between two words, going back to the basics of the foundation of our initiative. On one hand, human, and human we intend individuals, as we heard also from Alberto, people, the people-centered approach, not exclusively a state-centric approach, but a different perspective where the citizens of the world is the epicenter of these international relations, and that has particular interests in terms of its own well-being, that comprises health, equity, opportunities for a better life. And the second word, that is security, that can be expressed in, as I was saying before, in tackling this growing fear for a general insecurity that is not just provoked by war, it's provoked by the enemy within, that Alberto somehow pointed to. mean, that enemy that has no walls, that is impossible to contain, but that is around us. Because the real danger is represented by what we don't know, but we don't know and what we do not understand. And that can apply to viruses, to problems, general problems around the world, such as climate change, droughts, poverty, lack of coping mechanisms, and infrastructures everywhere, and also effects of globalization, of technology, of artificial intelligence. So you see, when we have this panoplia of issues that, of course, respond to the 7 dimensions that Phoebe before mentioned, and I can mention them again to you, but you see, is an expanding kind of list. When we talk about the security issues that we have to deal with in our daily life as individuals, as humans, we cannot just frame them into some wording and some definitions. The definitions need to be interpreted. So that is the first point I want to make. When we started with this campaign, Human Security for All, we used this word, interpretation, as a buzzword. And why is that? Because in reality, we need to interpret somehow what is contained in the General Assembly resolution, in the UN official documents about the importance of human security, what it is, what it stands for, but also the interpretation has to go in the other sense, has to go from the people, how people perceive their fears, how people what are people needs, and how we can represent them towards national and international authorities. So this is somehow the essential task that we have ahead. And when we talk about core messages, and we could recite so many of them, we have to understand that in any case, they will not be exhaustive. This depends on the subjects, the arguments that we are going to discuss, the threats that we are confronted with. And this is why it's so important to maintain a very open approach, especially with the civil society, Liberato, that you do represent. And more inputs are required from representatives of the civil society, of international and national civil organizations, because they are really our counterparts. It is our voice and their voice that has to be heard. And in order to hear their voices, we need to understand in detail from the example of the people in the street, what is their fear? How can you confront that? What is needed to represent that at an international level? So this for me is the real essence of our effort that we are doing as we continue with our campaign, as we implement the campaign. But certainly the campaign is somehow like a never-ending task, because it's something that just started, but will require years of implementation, in the sense of really making sure that people really get heard and that their concerns are brought around the international arena. So this for me is the main point, but I think that this was already stated even before the foundation of the World Academy of Art and Science. If we think about the shared aspirations of humans, that was very well expressed in the 1955 Russell-Einstein Manifesto that gave birth to the Pugwash movement, and therefore also to the World Academy of Art and Science. It contained a fantastic appeal. That is still the appeal, no other appeal in I've used is appealing as much as that one. And when this appeal ends with these fantastic words, remember your humanity and forget the rest. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. And this is not really the best way not to be verbose about what is the essence of human security. Is an intimate reflection on who we are and what do we need to do, what do we need to achieve for a better world. And we should also forget about the rest. The question is, what did they mean? Einstein, Russell, and the other signatories of that manifesto at that time. When I think about that, I feel that they are thinking about all the unnecessary, all the words that we keep using, the definitions, the labeling that we use for messages that need to be better and more clearly explained to people. Because if that's not the way, it will be very difficult to have a full implementation of the SDGs. Unfortunately, we are experts in this field, but we forget that we also need to put ourselves in the shoes of the layman or laywoman and say, what do we mean with those targets, really? And we have to keep repeating. They're not easily understood. The great strength of the human security approach is all-encompassing. That in a few words, in 2 words actually, it represents the essence of the SDGs. So for that reason, in my opinion, is in a nutshell describes what the SDGs are and how we can really accelerate their implementation, looking within the problems themselves. So just saying that, I think that we have to consider how we can be better understood, and we are doing so in the campaign through so many signatories, so many supporters and partners, extremely important organizations that are accompanying us. I will not mention the numbers or figures, is not that the relevant point. The relevant point is that they're growing, that there is a movement behind. We have started a movement through thanks to the HS for All campaign that will not end. I believe that because I think the civil society wants that. We have so many stakeholders. We have so many representatives of youth movements. We have social media with us that are following us on a daily basis. So this is really our strength. I mean, so the most important thing, maybe I should stop here. I haven't checked how many minutes I have, Liberato. Maybe you can tell me. But I think that the universal collectivity of individuals, that is really what is the target of the Human Security Initiative, can make things change. I mean, we can make things change if we consider universal collectivity of individuals, and we can co-create a peaceful future for all. But of course, we have also to accompany and we have also to interact with the multilateral system as it is, that, as it was said before, requires urgent reform, but not wait for the reforms, because the reforms will take years to have an effect on the lives of people. We have to act now. So, Liberato, I really believe that we have a great opportunity, thanks to you, thanks to the vital people around this platform today, to say what people need and how people can be better represented in the various dimensions of human security, that, as we said, are economic, food, health, environmental, personal, community, political, but they're not decomposed. They are asynchrony. They have to be considered as an aggregate, as really an issue that has to be considered univocally with our common agenda somehow, and with a systemic approach. I mean, if we forget that we look at the cure, but we don't look at the cause of the problem, obviously we will never sort out a positive effect. So thank you, Liberato. I'm very happy to be with you and to respond to some questions, if any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donato, for a very substantive intervention. We now have Isabella online with us, so I will call on Dr. Isabella Bunn to take over the panel moderation.
Thank you so much, and apologies for the technical difficulties. I'm sure everyone around the world has never experienced such a problem. So I do apologize. I'm delighted to be joining you from Oxford, England. It's a place that's full of ideas, just like this incredible gathering of people that are thinking today about human security, and more importantly, what do we do next, individually and collectively and through all of our networks. I loved what was just mentioned about the all-encompassing nature of human security, about the urgency of human security, and in one sense, the infinite measure of human security. We will never be finished with this task, but we must start now and continue the amazing work that we've already seen happening through the UN security effort, post-Cold War especially, UNDP, the Human Development Report in 1994, I think it was, to shift the focus from a military and defense context really to one in investment in humanity and nutrition and health and social and economic inclusion on a grand scale. So it was in 1999 when this trust fund was established to promote human security and to really activate projects. And now again, a new report, UNDP last year, human security threats in the Anthropocene. In other words, the world that is dominated by human life and the ramifications that it holds. So I'm delighted now to introduce our next panelist, who is Ketan Patel, with a rich background in business and finance.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Thank you, Liberato, for inviting me to this very important gathering. And thank you again on behalf of my colleagues from the World Academy of Art and Science and the Human Security for All campaign for this important collaboration with you. This is a subject that we have studied as part of something that I chair called Force for Good. Force for Good looks at the capital in the world and the system of capital and how it moves around the world to identify whether it will actually fund the UN Sustainable Development Goals and deliver the human security that we all think should be here for all of us. I step back first and say that since 2015 and the launch of the SDGs, the last 7 years have shown our ability to do extraordinary things to address these big issues. Trillions of dollars have been committed by banks and financial institutions for climate change. The medical development during the pandemic, the high inclusion and huge inclusion programs that have been launched all across the world to include minorities, and financial inclusion systems that have been launched that have brought about 500 million people into the banking and payment system. These challenges that we've been facing have brought out the best in us, but also unfortunately brought out the worst in us. And so what we find is all the good things that we might describe really only serve somewhere between a third and half of the world's population. And as that population grows, of course, the system strains to see if it can deliver to the remainder. But we should not be mistaken. The current system, the current model of finance and of economics are designed to only serve approximately a third and maybe half of the world. They're not fit to serve the rest. And if we look at it this way and say almost everything we consume, everything we touch and feel is born of fossil fuels and the fossil fuel era and the industrialization that followed that. So the whole system is built on an energy source which gave huge prosperity and created all the interlinkages we see now between the world in terms of trade and the economics that we see that flows through the financial system and puts man on the moon and so on. But it is not designed to serve everybody. It has not reached most of the global south. And so it's not a system that can actually survive if we wish to have human security for all. This system, though, under strain as it was, has been shaken in the last 6 to 7 years or so by populism, by the pandemic, and by power rivalry. And so it is unraveling. And the latest UN assessment shows that none of the 17 goals are on track to be achieved by 2030. In fact, 12% of the underlying targets are on track, just 12%. 50% are moderately or severely off track, and nearly 40% have either stalled or regressed below the 2015 levels. That's the scorecard. If we simply step back and say, what did we do? We did some fantastic things. And that list of innovations, which we publish every week on the Force for Good website and to a very large group now across the world, is extraordinary in terms of achievements. But the scorecard is very simple. We are serving, in terms of the SDG goals and achieving those, only 12% of those goals are being delivered. In the last year, it's estimated that maybe record amounts were invested in the UN SDGs, but progress stalled, and so the funding requirement to 2030 did not decline. The estimate is probably a few $1 trillion have been invested once again, and higher than before, and yet we still step backwards. We do a very detailed analysis, and we're about to release next week our report on capital as a force for good, which actually looks at how the money flows through the world, where it ends up, and what it's spent on. It also looks at this year the solutions. And what we find is without innovation, some radical innovation, based on our estimates, the total funding to achieve the SDGs, without this radical mobilization of solutions and initiatives, would take up approximately 1/3 to 40% of the world's money. Clearly, that money will not be made available because 1/3 to 40% of the world's money is not waiting to be handed off to something else. It's already utilized paying salaries, building infrastructure, paying pensions, paying insurance, and so on and so on and so on. It is not there to be mobilized for anything else. So how do we solve those problems? It seems like an intractable problem, despite us being such a smart species with so much depth and such ability to innovate. We seem to fail at this task. Our work, which we'll be launching, as I say, sometime next week, looks at how you close that gap. And what we find is there are a number of solution areas, and it's exciting to actually find that actually that gap can be closed, and potentially in the timescale, but it will require an immense task of mobilization. We identify 6 solution areas, which I won't go through to take away from the report that I know our people would like to put into the marketplace next week. But it points to a series of solutions, 6 types, which if mobilized and put into the market and rolled out across the world, would actually close the gap. In fact, what is exciting is they would close more than 100% of the gap. So it's not as if we have a lack of solutions, a lack of answers to this problem. We go a step further in the report. We look at it and say, can we be very specific? For example, policy is a big area which can solve the problems. Can we identify which policies should be rolled out? And so we look across the world at the policies and who has the best frameworks of policies and how those might be rolled out across the world. And we find that, yes, policies can solve nearly 1/3 of the world's problems, and they exist somewhere in the world in a form which is very advanced and very sophisticated and can tackle the issues. So there is good reason to be hopeful that actually we can do that. For some reason, the implementation of this is very difficult. So we have gone a step further. We've said, just like the policy one, can we identify other solutions? And we will report on 15 such initiatives, which are of different levels of scale and implementation, but are scalable and transferable globally. And these 15 are indicative of what could be done to close nearly 100% of the gap. I wish to step back, and I intended to keep this short and to the point. And I would say that NGOs feature in our list of 15 great things that could be done. And Liberato, you and I have spoken often and touched on how Force for Good should work with CoNGO. And we very much would like to, because what we find is there are NGOs that are exemplary in terms of their scale, their capacity to fund, their ability to make an impact, to measure, to report back. And so NGOs have a critical role to play as part of the solution set. that can close this gap. They're usually deeply underfunded. There are a few that are not, but mostly they are. At their best, what we find is they have, number one, a deep knowledge of the challenge. Number two, they understand which solutions work today. And number three, they have judgment on what might work in the future. And they are filled with great people who are very, very dedicated to the challenge at hand. And in that sense, they want to solve the issue. And at their best, they epitomize humanity serving humanity. In the Indian language, this is called seva. And this service of others is an important ingredient in the success of the most successful of the NGOs. The IPCC report points to 5 scenarios that are part of the underpinning of all their climate reports. These 5 are very important. They paint a picture of the potential future of humanity and how we might transition. Not after that, but how we might transition. These 5 scenarios include, number one, a green path where we agree all together to retrench back, to reduce our economic footprint. It seems very unlikely this will happen. Our system is not organized politically or economically for leaders to go to their people and say, I want you to retrench 30% of your economic footprint so that we can save the planet. People just don't seem ready to do it. Even 15 million people dying during the pandemic doesn't make people ready today to actually retrench. Another scenario is playing out the current trend line, which is mediocre and will not achieve the SDGs, will not level up the world. The third is nationalism and security rivalry, which is what we seem suited to. We seem to want to fight each other and find reasons to find fault with each other and follow that through. The fourth is a disunited and unequal progress. We also seem suited to that. Those that have it seem to want to keep it, even during the pandemic. Those that were overstocked with vaccines kept them rather than share them, very often. And then it took the UN and others to figure out programs for this distribution. The final is a risky gamble to go all out for growth using fossil fuels in the hope that just in time, innovation will bail us out and we will find a timely solution. It's a risky gamble. So there is no ideal scenario. There isn't a conversation around these 5 to figure out where we should land. And so just as I wrap up, I would say, one thing is clear as we look at the complexity of the systems that allow economics and trade and finance to flow across the world, that individuals have a critical role to play, not because they should solve the problems necessarily, but because they do have a critical role to play, because they own 2/3 of the world's money. And if we can hope that with rising consciousness comes a more conscious form of capitalism, the individual will probably be the most important player in this system. As individuals are leaders, just like all the people on this call. Individual are followers, like many of us on this call. But individuals also take all these positions as CEOs and heads and so on. And individuals, more importantly, are consumers. And as such, something like 2/3 of the world's consumption are choices made by individuals. And those choices will change because the internet is interconnecting all of us. And so we're at a unique point in human history where we get connected to each other in real time completely. It's never happened before. To send messages took so long. It took travel. And then there were phone lines that were unreliable. But now, if everyone is connected, it's a unique point where we have a choice and a chance to maybe raise all of human consciousness and awareness so that people are more aware of the consequences of their actions. And we all take different decisions. AI will not only spur that, it will make it an imperative because another potential intelligence is being born that may be more clinically tougher than us, that may be different, that may make different choices. And so we have to raise our consciousness. The conditions under which other stakeholders, not just the individual, but the private sector and the public sector, will make choices about their role and how they can make an impact are explored in our report. And it's positive, as I say, we're pleased to report that we are very positive as a result of this very detailed work, that it is in our grasp to create a more peaceful, prosperous, and freer world where human security for all is the cornerstone, the touchstone of how we move forward. thank you very much for an opportunity to say that to all of us. Thank you.
Ketan, thank you so much for those words, putting it in the context of the systemic risks, the geopolitical risks, a need for priorities, and I especially appreciated the idea of solutions. I remember reading your previous report, and it really was breathtaking. There's a line, certainly in American English, follow the money. And I think that's what you've tried to do, follow the money to see how that money can be directed toward the SDGs and toward human security. So I look forward to reading the report, and I would recommend it to everyone. You also mentioned a sense of conscientiousness, but I also thought of conscience when I think about Congo, and I've been familiar with their work for many years over a number of campaigns going back decades. And that is what struck me. They are indefatigable, they are creative, they are connectors, and they are so passionate. But in a sense, I remember thinking one night that they're the conscience of the world. Their sense of vision and practicality both, which is an unusual combination. So I wanted to honor them because it is their anniversary. And I think if we think of the cumulative good Congo has done in those decades, it would really be breathtaking and a source of optimism among what must be acknowledged as a fair amount of pessimism as we go about this task. I wanted to raise a question that we see here that was presented to Donato about the role of legislators, including mayors and parliamentarians. What is their role at that local level to advance the human security agenda? And in particular, what are the means of collaboration with WAS and with other organizations? And perhaps if Donato could answer that question very briefly. We only have a few more moments, and then I'll just make a few closing remarks. Thank you. I think that perhaps Donato needs to come back to us, or perhaps
Isabella, could I make a quick answer to that?
Yes, please. I was going to say perhaps
Donato is far more
qualified
qualified than I am. Donato's far more qualified. My quick comment would be, our analysis found that about 30% or more, but at least around 30%, requires policymakers to introduce laws, regulations, and governance. And the SDGs were designed for that to happen. It just hasn't happened at the scale that it needs to happen. And without that underpinning, capital will not flow, ideas cannot flow, and NGOs and others that are actors on the ground cannot easily execute the things they need to. So one of the biggest tasks to create a very big win for the world is to roll out this policy layer across the world in a very coordinated manner, and it can be done.
You know, and I might just add, as you were speaking, Ketan, I was also thinking, once the policy is in place, of course, it's a question of the take up, the funding, and the implementation. Sure. And one of the positive trends I see is focusing on government outcomes and actually putting the metrics in place to see that government has delivered on its promises. And this would be another way of amplifying the human security agenda. So I know we only have a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to close perhaps also on a couple of notes of optimism on two themes, which we're starting to see a greater human perspective involved in these questions. One of them is on the notion of peace. And you may be familiar with the work of the Institute for Peace, and their tagline, actually, if you looked them online, Vision for Humanity. So they can clearly see that these two questions are very closely linked. But the notions are the following, what they call the 8 pillars of peace: well-functioning government, sound business environment, equitable distribution of resources, acceptance of the rights of others, good relations with neighbors, free flow of information, and high levels of human capital. So within that list, you can see how much can really connect with the idea of human security and put it in that broad framing, which of course also would include SDG 16. The other, because I'm a lawyer myself, looking at human rights questions and also international legal and rule of law questions, there's a real movement now to focus on a human-centered approach to justice. Studies have been done to see what the justice gaps are, and they are staggering. I mean, literally billions of people around the world do not have adequate access to justice and to the solutions that it provides. So if we're looking at the agenda, the 2030 agenda, based on a just, equitable, tolerant, open, and socially inclusive world in which the needs of the most vulnerable are met, we do need to have this human-centered approach And this is being picked up now collectively by various organizations involved in justice questions around the World Justice Project with its data, the American Bar Association, Pathfinders for Justice, and so forth. So it's an exciting place to watch how literally the #1 principle, put people and their legal needs at the center of justice systems, understand what people need and what they want when they seek justice, and which obstacles they face and what kind of justice they receive. So it means justice is not just magnificent court buildings. Justice is what happens when someone walks into that court building and looks for justice. So I think this notion of peace and justice in a holistic, integrated way would really support the human security agenda. I see that we're at the end of our time. I'm so grateful to all of the speakers, all of the participants, the organizers, and the that are online. And we hope that really what I was thinking ahead of this gathering is make that connection. Maybe if each one of us could think of one thing to do, one organization to contact, one article to write, one set of blogs, one conference to present, I think it would make an enormous difference given the astonishing reach and dedication of the people with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella, for moderating panel 1. Before we transition to panel 2, I just want to give voice to the question raised in the and typed in the Q&A box from Marta Benavides from El Salvador. She asked the question, and if the next speakers can take care partly of her concerns, that would be great. She said, the theme of this event is most important and urgent and necessary, yet the way the nations, and especially Latin America, Caribbean, see that the relation of peace and security are so interrelated that at this point they are moving to copy already implemented models of how to deal with violence and criminality, regardless of their impact on human rights, individually and collectively, and on the planet and the environment. So I'd like to invite our participants to look at the Q&A box and read the rest of the questions, because she's talking about the mega prisons that are currently being erected and sprouting all over El Salvador, and in Marta's view is affecting the sustainability of the people and the planet. So our panelists may also answer, may type their responses. Any of you can do that. So without much further ado, I will now panel number 2, sustainable peace, and we have a capable moderator, equally a speaker, Alan Ware, who is the peace educator and nuclear disarmament consultant, and so many other hats that Alan wear. It's a pleasure to work with you again, Alan. You have the screen and the panel.
Thank you very much, Liberato, and thank you for including such a panel in this event. As the title says, this is a panel on sustainable peace. And this concept, in fact, the obligations for sustainable peace come directly from the opening words of the UN Charter, which says that the principal objective of the United Nations is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. To save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. So this is placing the obligation of peace as a sustainability obligation. It's not just peace now, but to ensure peace into the future. A sustainable peace, that means a peace that does include the principles that we just heard from the previous panel of justice, of human rights. But a key thing with this, and what we're looking very much at this panel, is the peace between nations, because we haven't succeeded in ending war. We still have armed conflict happening. The UN Charter is strong on the legal obligation not to engage in war. Article 2 prohibits the threat or use of force in international relations and requires members of the United Nations to resolve their conflicts by peaceful means. And then in Article 33, it lists the range of approaches and mechanisms that member states have to try and attempt to use, including good relations, negotiation, mediation, arbitration, adjudication using regional officers and others. And yet there is a failure of the member states to fully live up to that. It's not to say it's not happening. Many UN member states, most UN member states, are using these methods and mechanisms most of the time, but when they don't, that's when we have the real problems of armed conflict and the incredible impact that armed conflict has in preventing the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and restricting or curtailing civil rights, human rights when there is armed conflict. And so this is why this is such an important aspect. We won't be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals or the human security framework if we don't work better on the sustainable piece and on assisting, moving our governments, the UN member states, to use these mechanisms rather than the threat or use of force, to use the International Court of Justice, to use the mediation service of the United Nations, to use the regional bodies and the other mechanisms and approaches which our speaker is going to talk about. So this is a very, very important session. And this, we call it, I guess, the overall framework for this is the Common Security Framework. Because common security is security, which is security for all. So that is a sustainable piece of security. And the speakers are going to mention different aspects of this. We have 4 speakers for this session. And then just before we go into the questions, we'll also have a short announcement because the Unfold Zero, which I'm the co-founder of, is using this opportunity to also release the platform for the September 26th, the UN International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. And that platform is a combination of a human and common security approach to work for the elimination of nuclear weapons. So without further ado, I'll introduce our first speaker, who's Sabir Hossain Chowdhury, who is a special envoy to the Prime Minister, Bangladesh Prime Minister, on Environment and Climate Change. He's the chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on the Ministry of the Environment, Forest and Climate Change, honorary president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and co-president of Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. And just to mention that Sabir Chowdhury will have to leave quite soon after his comments. So if there's any questions that come into the question and answer box during his presentation that are specifically for Mr. Chowdhury, then we'll ask him that before he has to leave to his next event. So Mr. Chowdhury, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alan, and let me congratulate CoNGO for their 75 years of great advocacy and actual congratulations to you also for being such an able leader in leading this very important and critical organization going forward. And then you have summarized and the various dimensions of peace. What I would like to do is, following on from the previous discussion, is to place peace in the context of sustainable development. And of course, when we talk about the SDGs, and we have talked about a lot today, we talk about the 5 Ps. And the first P is, of course, people, the centrality of people. And by that, we don't mean people in a global collective sense. Of course, that is there, but we also mean the individual right down to the local level. So I think the centrality of people in the whole SDG agenda is something that needs to be emphasized. And then we have the concept, the second P of peace. And we know that there can be no sustainable development without peace and vice versa. So that is also something which is, we all know. Peace is also a prerequisite for prosperity. So that is the third P. And that prosperity, if it's to be sustainable, we have to be within planetary boundaries. The 4th P is planet. And of course, the 5th P is partnership, which we know is also very important. So, I mean, if we look at it in that context, and it was, of course, a very bold, a very powerful vision, leaving no one behind in 2015. And as Mr. Ketan Patel mentioned earlier, the SDGs, in fact, are in serious trouble. There's been a recent report from SCAP where they are talking about, it will take us till 2068 for the SDGs to be realized. And there is stagnation across the goals, and in some cases there is regression. So this is something which is extremely worrying. When we talk about peace, we know that peace has also various elements: peace keeping, peace making, peace building. These are all various dimensions that come into play. And we also know that generally peace has been under-recognized, it has been under-prioritized, and it has been under-resourced. We know how much resources are available for armaments, for waging wars. And even if you look at something like climate change, the money isn't simply there. The funding deficit when we started the SDGs in 2015 was $2.4 billion, and that has gone up. And I know some of us talk about COVID and conflicts, but we were never on track in terms of meeting our funding obligations, even before these things had come in. So this whole idea of peace, holding together, on the one hand, human security, and on the other, sustainable development, is absolutely critical, but it has to be considered in that holistic context. And so the last point that I would like to make, and I'm going through this very quickly because there is another engagement that I have to go to, is that, peace is not perfect because it is something, it's an aspiration, it's something that we constantly strive for. But we would much rather have imperfect peace than war. Thank you very much, Ellen.
So, Bear, thank you very much. Just before you leave, do you have like a minute or two just to address the question which came up in the previous event, previous session, which was the role of parliamentarians, because you are a parliamentarian and you're the honorary president of the Interparliamentary Union, the role of parliamentarians to advance both human security, but also common security. The peaceful resolution of conflicts between nations and disarmament, including nuclear disarmament.
Yeah.
And in your work with the Interparliamentary Union, is that a very useful body to help support parliamentary engagement on these issues?
Absolutely. Very much so. And in fact, we always say when politicians or when heads of government stop talking, that's when parliamentarians should be talking more. So the whole idea of parliamentary diplomacy and furthering a dialogue is there. And even in terms of the, the common security agenda, this is something that the IPU actively promotes. Human security for all is one of the principles of the IPU. We have worked together with the World Academy of Sciences in trying to get a survey. And I think what that does, as Gary was speaking earlier, we bring the agenda from the global to the local and to the personal. So personalization of the global agenda is very important. And trying to look at our representation function, where we represent people, trying to look at it through the lens of the individual is so very important.
Thank you very much, Sabir. I know you have to leave, but I know also you played a key role in the development of a handbook for parliamentarians, which is being used by parliamentarians around the world on disarmament for security and sustainable development. So we'll put a link to that in the chat later on for others to be involved, because that is a tool for civil society to engage with parliamentarians on these issues. And thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to head off now. We'll now move on to the next speaker for this session, is Rebecca Shute. Rebecca is Executive Director of Citizens for Global Solutions in the United States, also the co-chair of the Washington Working Group on the International Criminal Court. She's a lawyer who's also worked with a parliamentary organization, Parliamentarians for Global Action, and is also one of the co-founders of a new initiative, which I think Rebecca is going to talk about today, Law Not War, which is better use of legal mechanisms for international peace. So, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's an honor to join today's proceedings, and particularly this panel, which is a topic that's been the raison d'etre of my organization since its founding in 1947, the United World Federalists, and which continues to animate us today, the quest for sustainable peace. It's also a privilege to follow Honorable Chowdhury. I suppose he's no longer here, but I think we first met more than 10 years ago, exploring the relationship between citizens and their elected representatives as part of the Global Parliamentary Report. And of course, I look forward to complementing the interventions of collaborator Jonathan Granoff and Gospodica Damjanovic. And Alan, it's always a pleasure to see you. And I guess with your WFM IGP hat, which is of course one of many, you might be implicated in some of my remarks. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I come to you from CGS's office and headquarters in Washington, D.C. on the ancestral and unceded land of the Anacostan people. So it's a pleasure to join you today as Executive Director of Citizens for Global Solutions. We are a non-governmental, nonprofit, nonpartisan membership-based organization in consultative eco-stock status. We bring together a diverse collective of individuals and actors. And first and foremost, we're a member-driven movement with the common goal of a democratic world federation predicated on peace, human rights, and the rule of law. So to begin, I hope that we can all agree that sustainable peace is characterized by not only the absence of violent conflicts, but the protection of human rights and the presence of social, economic, and political systems that promote well-being, harmony. And this essential ethos contains component parts, including inter alia, inclusive and effective governance, the rule of law, international cooperation, and social cohesion. And these are among the basic tenets that comprise our vision of democratic world governance, on which our organization and, in fact, the World Federalist Movement for Institute for Global Policy were founded in 1947, a year before CoNGO and before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, by some of the greatest minds and peace champions of the last century. So Einstein, Ben Ferencz, William Fulbright, Norman Cousins, to name just a few. And so these individuals had the courage to dream of a world without war, with global institutions and human cooperation, enabling sustainable peace for all people and for our planet itself. So as an inheritor of their legacy, I feel like I'm contractually obligated to be a bit of a dreamer, but at the same time, as a lawyer and an advocate, I'm constitutionally disposed to tether the grand vision to concrete actions and policies that can be taken to advance these big ideas. And I think that the occasion of the Summit for the Future, the People's Pact, and the SDG Midpoint Summit, in which we will participate in 10 days, offer the opportunity to do both. So my organization and its global counterpart remain guided by a declaration of purpose, which begins with, and I will read this verbatim, excuse me, we'll believe that peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice, of law, of order, in short, of government and the institutions of government. World peace can be created and maintained only a world federal government, universal and strong enough to prevent armed conflict between nations and having direct jurisdiction over the individuals in those matters within its authority. And this echoes very closely, or I should say presages, the policy paper on a new agenda of peace, for peace, conceived as part of the Secretary General's Common Agenda, which states that unless the benefits of international cooperation become more tangible and equitable, and unless states can manage their competition and move beyond their current divisions to find pragmatic solutions to global problems, human suffering will worsen. So in fact, reading these documents side by side, it's sometimes difficult to tell which one comes from where, the Common Agenda, just recently promulgated, or our founding declaration promulgated in Montreux, Switzerland, where coincidentally I was lucky enough to spend my birthday last week in a full circle moment. And that might seem cause for cynicism or disillusion that this conversation has been ongoing for more than 75 years, the 75-year milestone we commemorate today. But I don't see this as a case of old wine and new bottles. And I see our work today as both carrying on this enterprise that has been ongoing longer than I've been on the planet and capitalizing on this particular inflection point. And there is, in fact, a red thread linking these grand visions, this philosophy with practice. So I'll use my time, what I have left, to very summarily capitulate 5 interconnected areas we see as essential to sustainable peace with reference to their place in the new agenda. And then I will briefly zoom in on one nascent project that I see as the bedrock of the existence of legitimate, credible, and effectively utilized legal alternatives to war, which Alan gestured to briefly. And then I'll close very succinctly with a note on the intergenerational aspects of this endeavor, how CGS engages with youth voices and how others can join us. So today we concentrate our efforts in 5 interconnected areas of advocacy. We both lead on certain efforts and serve as a forum to give oxygen and space to new ways of thinking of global governance institutions. So those are strengthening the United Nations, supporting new global institutions and mechanisms, promoting disarmament and peace, arresting environmental degradation, and then the crux of my remarks, safeguarding human rights and upholding international law. I do want to say a quick word on UN reform, because I do think that's integral to our conversation. I will say that CGS has been involved in efforts to reform and strengthen the UN system since our inception, gaining steam in the 1950s with efforts to democratize the UN in a global world government system. We have called for a UN peace force since 1952, an idea that's now gaining some momentum through various proposals with different models of standing global bodies effectively able to step in when states are unable or unwilling to address armed conflict. And then since at least the 70s, we've been involved in efforts towards the improving the effectiveness of the United Nations, including launching commissions supported by legislators, coming back to the role of parliamentarians here in the US Congress, including Senator George McGovern, that would have inter alia supported Security Council reform. And it's, I think, hopeful and instructional to see some of the Security Council reform measures gain traction in the last couple of years, particularly with the passage of UN General Assembly Resolution 76262, enabling debate in the General Assembly and the use of a veto, and also the proposals put forth by the ACT Code of Conduct regarding the Security Council's mandatory compelling the Security Council to step away from the veto power in cases of atrocity crimes, and also the veto restraint measure put forth by France and Mexico that would compel restraint in mass atrocity cases. I won't speak too much to the new institutions that we try to give oxygen to, as I mentioned, but these include inter alia, a UN Parliamentary Assembly, a World Court of Human Rights, other measures and organs that would address some of the lacunae within the current UN system. With disarmament, we are honored to join with many partners over the course of decades in supporting full nuclear disarmament, and now as part of an agenda toward common security versus nuclear deterrence. So this brings me to the crux of my intervention of upholding international law. CGS was honored and remains to be a quintessential part of the efficacy of the International Criminal Court through the Coalition for the International Criminal Court. And as Alan mentioned in my introduction, I am the co-convener of the Washington Working Group for the ICC. And we'd like to bring the same energy and animation to compelling the universality and effectiveness of the International Court of Justice. So our founding member, Ben Ferencz, chief prosecutor at Nuremberg, who we lost earlier this year, proclaimed that there can be no peace without justice, no justice without law, and no meaningful law without a court to decide what is just and lawful under any given circumstance. And the new agenda states similarly, and here I have to read again, excuse me, that one of the greatest achievements of the United Nations is the development of a body of international law that governs relations among sovereign states. International law fosters predictability of behavior, which increases trust. But even as member states recognize and emphasize the importance of international law, it is sometimes challenged. So one of the greatest potential tools at this disposal for the Pacific resolution for disputes, the International Court of Justice, is currently underutilized as both a prophylactic measure and mechanism for accountability to ensure that interstate conflicts are resolved in the court system and not on the battlefields. And so our new joint program with WFM, IGP, and other organizations, Law Not War, seeks to increase the compulsory jurisdiction of the court over interstate disputes. Currently, only 73 states have currently made declarations acknowledging compulsory jurisdiction, one of 4 ways that courts can, disputes can reach the court. I won't go into the legality unless somebody wants to ask a question in chat. And this also dovetails, I would like to say, with exploration of other judicial institutions. Given that the ICJ has authority only over states, the ICC has authority over personal liability, but only in the cases of atrocity crimes. There still remain, as I alluded to earlier, lacunae in the law with regards to human rights, with regards to the obligations of corporations, and non-individual, non-state entities. So in closing, I said I would speak a little bit to the intergenerational aspect of this work. I feel like we are here building cathedrals and not making widgets. And our movement was founded primarily by students. So it's very important to us that we are now passing the torch and are greatly appreciative of the opportunity to involve young people through the Global Futures Forum and through other mechanisms. We have a lot of educational programming at CGS that not only simulates the UN and global governance systems as they are, but envisions how they could be, taking into account the real voices and perspectives of young people. And I would also just like to say that we are, in fact, a people-powered movement. We rely on our coalition partners, we rely on our individual members, and we rely on chapters throughout the United States as a US-based organization. And so I invite you all to visit our website, globalsolutions.org, to learn more about the program that I discussed, but also how we interact with at the grassroots level and through our ECOSOC consultative status, as well as our presence here in Washington, DC. So thank you again so much for the opportunity.
Rebecca, thank you so much for explaining so well, particularly for a non-lawyer audience, what is, some of the key aspects of international law, what are legal processes and legal mechanisms, because international law, as you've demonstrated, can be so important in assisting ensure sustainable peace, resolving conflicts, but it needs legislators, diplomats, civil society activists, youth, to highlight this and encourage member states of the UN and others to better use these mechanisms. So thank you so much, because the way you were talking about it was very clear for people who may not have had the same sort of training in law that you have had. And that's important to get our message out to everybody. So thank you so much for that.
And I apologize to the interpreters. I took my 7 minutes very, very strictly.
We're now following up with another speaker who is also a lawyer and who's also done very good work on legal education for a broader audience, as well as bringing some of these principles into other constituencies, working with Nobel laureates, working with religious leaders and religious communities, and working with civil society organizations. It's Jonathan Granoff, who's the president of the Global Security Institute, a permanent observer to the UN for the International Anti-Corruption Agency, also a fellow and trustee of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, and international lawyer who's also on the Blue Ribbon panel of the American Society of International Law on non-proliferation and international security, and a number of other roles. Jonathan is someone who knows the UN system well, knows how to interact with it, and knows how to bring it and people into the UN and make it really the people's organization that it was set up to be. So Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alan, and I thank CoNGO. I thank everybody for putting this together. We're in a tremendous need to address the trust deficit that the world faces, and these kind of conversations are essential for that. The current paradigm in which the major states are pursuing their self-interest has reached a point where the foundation of all international relations is at risk. It is the principle of pacta sunt servanda, that promises must be kept. Or if previous promises that are entered into with the sobriety of legal power are ignored, then dialogue to go forward into the future is undermined. And that's the most serious challenge we face. It's called the trust deficit. And the trust deficit, I think, is even more severe than the trillions of dollars deficit between the needs to fulfill the Agenda 2030, the SDG agenda, and presently it's over $2 trillion a year as a deficit from what's needed to be funded. Because without the rebuilding of trust, there's no capacity for dialogue. So I want to just highlight one of the areas where you can see this breakdown and its severity, and then suggest how we have to focus on moving forward and what the task is before us, and how human security fits into that, and how common security, which is the expression of human security among states, fits into that. I believe that the third most important legal instrument of the 20th century is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, following from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which follows from the most important legal instrument of the 20th century, the United Nations Charter. And the NPT has been relatively successful. It has constrained the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and it's been instrumental in helping take us down from over 65,000 of these horrific devices to less than 14,000 today. But if a mere 2% of those weapons were to be exploded, the amount of soot into the stratosphere would render civilization a dream of the past. And the suffering that would ensue, even from a small exchange of these weapons, is beyond description. So the way in which the world has dealt with this challenge has been through the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty negotiations, in which diplomats, in good faith since its indefinite extension in 1995, have laid out over 60 commitments that would make the world safer, promote and strengthen the rule of law, and walk us toward the legal commitment embodied in the treaty and explicitly affirmed in the unanimous decision of the International Court of Justice to obtain a nuclear weapons-free world. Those commitments included the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, a fissile material cutoff treaty, lowering the operational status of the weapons and their political salience, strengthening the verification systems and safeguards. The problem is that the diplomats have negotiated in good faith, all the nations, Russia, China, the United States, France, the United Kingdom, the P5. But when they go back to their capitals, despite the fact that they've argued to the international community that they can be trusted, that they're pursuing strategic stability, when they go back to their capitals, the countervailing arguments, not of strategic stability, not of moving toward disarmament, not of finding cooperation in addressing this existential threat. The countervailing argument, based on a 5th century Roman adage, pursue peace, receive war, pursue war, receive peace, peace through military domination and strength, prevails. And thus, as we speak today, the militarization of economies of the major states has gone to a burlesque proportion, gone to the proportion where literally trillions of dollars are being squandered in making the weapons, not just nuclear weapons, but the new high-tech digitalized hyper weapons are being dramatically improved. Improved means to an unimproved end. It is simply the wrong bus. Since 2000, over $25 trillion has been spent in this pursuit of security through military domination. This has led to the privileging within the nuclear weapon states of the bureaucracies that see the world as a perpetual realm of conflict, as a perpetual world of the jungle of the strong alone survive and the cooperative are marginalized. And this is very serious. As Joe Biden once said, "Don't tell me your values, show me your budget." And we can see the shortfall of the funding of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is implicitly a human security agenda of addressing the realism of the real threats that humanity faces, and the absolute gorging at the financial trough of military expenditures. So that to me is what's before us. And the problem is that it's based on mythical thinking. It's based on denying the realism that says that we have to cooperatively protect our third lung, the phytoplankton, which is 60 to 70% of our oxygen, which depends on the pH of the oceans, which depends on the climate stability. This is not an option. The fact that pandemics do not recognize borders requires not a vaccine apartheid world, but a cooperative health approach. The fact that we're cutting down the other part of our third lung that we all depend on, the rainforest, faster than they're replenishing, not to mention species destruction at 1,000 times the evolutionary base rate. So those of us who are saying we need to get on a different bus, a bus that's not dependent on perpetual fear, threat, and military thinking and exercises, but make the case time and time again that this is mythical thinking. Now, it's very severe when you have major states saying that they will define basic human rights based on their sovereign identification and that they're not universal. But the vast majority of countries have recently been expanding the definition of human rights with realism. Last year, the General Assembly adopted the position that a sustainable environment is a human right. A few years before that the threat and use of nuclear weapons is a violation of human rights. So I think that we need to make the argument that the fundamental universal human rights of the planet Earth today require cooperative security approaches amongst the nations of the world. That anything that opposes this is essentially mythical thinking that must be challenged by all those who respect science, who respect reason, and those who respect values take the human rights approach. We have to have a large tent approach to the pursuit of saving the human species and the planet Earth. So there are some, like Governor Jerry Brown doesn't want to call it human security. He wants to call it planetary realism. Well, that's fine with me. It gets to the same place. Other people want to use the human rights paradigm and expand the definition of human rights so that it's comprehensive. That's fine. Others want to say we have the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a commitment of the world. We have to achieve them. That's fine. It doesn't really matter, but we have to challenge the actual reality of, as we speak, the ongoing threat of nuclear weapons, the ongoing increasing reliance on war and militarization. Now, that's not to say that we can just roll over and allow the illegal war in the Ukraine. But let me point out that when the President of the United States said that we were going to invade Iraq and the people of Baghdad would come out in celebration, my wife said, nah, I don't think so. And when Vladimir Putin said that Russia was going to invade Ukraine and the people of Kiev would celebrate their liberation from the so-called Jewish Nazi, I said, no, I don't think so. Now, here we have the heads of two countries, leaders, with the heads of them, the singular ability to actually end civilization, not utilizing the kind of common sense that any cab driver in either Baghdad or Kiev could have had. This is an unsustainable situation. So it's our job to challenge the current paradigm that relies on military threat as the key means of pursuing security with what is realistic. Science is on our side, human values are on our side. What has not been invoked is the passion of the power of ethics and the power of love. We seem to be reluctant to say to the public, this is an issue of, do you love your children? Do you love the children of other nations? Do you understand that the world, because of science and technology, has become so small that a mistake in one room in one country could end civilization, and that mistake could be made by any country? And that the technology that we have today could easily provide the elimination of the extraordinary disparities of wealth and a thriving relationship to the natural world. But it is our thinking that has to change. And the human security approach is an absolutely mark-on approach, because we know human beings are sacred and part of the entire web of life. We can't survive without the rainforest. We can't survive without the diversity of species. So I say very simply, love people, use things. Never love things and use people. That's an ethical norm that will be helpful, because when we put our concepts and use our concepts to divide us, then we undermine the very core of our peace and security, which is our birthright, our legal right, and our human right. So these discussions on how do we change,
Can you wrap up, because we've come to the end of the time?
This is going. These discussions need to be more like this one that we have today, with brilliant people speaking, need to be expanded and become be realized how absolutely important it is that we change the direction from fear to the hope of human security.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm very sorry for rushing you, but we've come to the end of the time for the session. I do ask the organisers if we can have a few more minutes, because we have one more speaker, plus two important questions in the Q&A, and then the quick announcement on the Unfold Zero platform. So the next speaker is Dora Damjanovic, and Dora is Ambassador for the Human Security for All campaign and a Junior Fellow for the World Academy for Arts and Sciences. Dora, I ask if you can keep your comments brief if possible, because we are so tight on time. It's very important that we have your voice, and the youth, we are pretty short on time at the moment. Thank you very much, Dora.
Thank you so much, Alan. And I will keep this as brief as possible, but I still need to say my point. So first, I want to say that it's really an honor to be on this panel with such esteemed speakers. And thank you all for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. I'm Dora, Ambassador of Human Security for All, and I believe that I'm the youngest person on this webinar today. So today I was presented with two choices. I could talk about sustainable peace in quite a professional manner, talking about how we need to focus on conflict resolution, social justice, human rights, economic development, etc., if we want sustainable peace. But I would like to use this opportunity today in a slightly different way. And the fact that now I have full attention of you, mostly decision makers, to present you a practical solution to a sustainable peace. And that solution is us, young people. So growing up, we, the youth, are often filled with grand ideas and enthusiasm for making a positive change in the world. However, we are frequently being met with a familiar refrain. You are too young, they say. You do not know what you're talking about. In schools and universities, we always engage in discussions about global issues, and we are very aware of them, from politics to global food crisis. We always study the problem, and yet we are rarely encouraged to seek practical solution. We are really rarely pushed to act. And we always hear this message: you youth have the power to change the world, or you, the people in general, each individual has the power to change the world. So I pose this question to all of you here today. How many of you personally, genuinely feel that you possess the power to change the world? And how many of you already know precisely how to go about it? So why do I ask this question? Because each one of you mostly occupies a respected position, a position that empowers you to shape and influence the world, whether you're a CEO, a minister, ambassador, or maybe hold another title. However, when we talk of changing the world, we encounter the obstacle, and that obstacle is the word power. So why does power pose a challenge when we talk about changing the world? Well, the answer is simple. The youth lack this kind of power. You might be confused, what am I talking about? But consider the presence of young voices in the main decision-making bodies, parliaments, institutions, and the like. I have very shocking statistics, which is globally, only 1.6 of representatives in the parliaments are under the age of 30. And mere 11% are under the age of 40. So we often hear impassioned speeches proclaiming, youth is our future, we need the youth. However, the issue lies in the lack of execution. Institutions proudly highlight their youth units and bring us young people into the fold as participants, advocates of important causes. Yet they seem to believe that our mere presence at events is enough, as if to say, look, we also encourage your youth participation. Checked. But the truth is that true change requires more than token gestures. It requires empowering youth to be equal partners in decision-making processes. So the irony here is that today's youth is going to be tomorrow's leaders, and this planet is going to be left to them. But at the same time, they have no power in the decision-making processes right now. I know from my personal experience how hard it is to be a young, enthusiastic person that wants to affect this world in a positive way, but does not feel heard, does not feel empowered. When I was around 21, me and my colleagues founded the NGO called Youth Leadership Network. Lucky enough, we partnered with World Academy of Art and Science, who really supported our visions, supported our goals to make a change. And today, I still consider myself to be one of the rare lucky ones, because I'm working with Human Security for All campaign that really gives a safe space for young visionary people to bring new ideas of how to elevate, how to promote human security, and to implement actually those ideas. And just to use this opportunity to thank Gary Jacobs and the rest of the team for that. Though my work with Human Security for All campaign and through my work with Youth Leadership Network, my NGO, I'm always collaborating with many youth NGOs all the time. And I think you would be astonished to see what those young people out there do, how they take care of problems regarding environmental sustainability, human rights, and other burning problems of today, anything related to sustainable peace. But not enough people take them seriously, and they do not have the type of power that you have. So I think it's time to bridge this gap between words and actions, between aspiration and execution. The youth are not the leaders of tomorrow. We are the leaders of today. We have the passion, we have the ideas, and the drive to create a sustainable peace for all. And what we need now is the recognition that our voice actually matters, our perspectives are invaluable, and our power to affect change is actually real, not only some big idea. So what is the practical solution that I was mentioning before for sustainable peace? Well, the solution is to understand young people, to understand their ideas, their thoughts, and for older generations to help them with their knowledge. That would be a win-win strategy for sustainable future. Young people know how to communicate with future leaders of our time because they're part of our generation. We can effectively convey the messages and knowledge that older generations have from the decision-making processes and bring solution in line with what young people want and understand, so that we can live and implement all the ideas of sustainable peace, all the ideas of Agenda 2030 for the next 50, 100 years. So we can really have a sustainable peace, so that we can really have a sustainable future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dora, for reminding us of the importance of engaging with youth, and not in a tokenism way, but actually engaging in the issues and policies, to see that this is something which has to be done in partnership, because although, as you say, young people are really engaged and really interested in engaging in these, they're not yet in the corridors of power, which many of us others are. So the cooperation is so important. We don't have time in this panel to explore this further. I hope more speakers in the following panels will pick this up further. But just to say that in my organisation, one of them, Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, most events we now do in an intergenerational model. Having more experienced legislators working in cooperation in the panels with youth, either young legislators or young activists or young academics, and that intergenerational partnership is really, really important. So thank you so much for the reminder. Really apologise that we pushed you on time. It's just that the panel is going a little bit over time. We have 3 important questions in the question and answer. I think 2 of them can be compressed into one. That's the one which I'll go second, on how to enforce international law, particularly when you have powerful countries violating it. I'll go to the 3rd question first, which is to Rebecca, and that's on the Ecocide initiative and how that is operating. So Rebecca, can you address the question on Ecocide?
Yes, and thank you so much to the host for letting us go a little bit over, because these are very important questions. So this is a wonderful example about how different complementary and concurrent pathways to justice are currently tackling an issue that defies borders, that defies a single solution. I'll start with the fact that very importantly in 2021, the International Criminal Court undertook an exercise with an advisory group that released a very credible and well-researched report that was then the subject of debate at the Assembly of States Parties, which is the legislative body that oversees the International Criminal Court, last December. And that report came out with a legal definition of ecocide that heretofore had really only lived in the realm of academia. However, that being said, there are disadvantages to only including ecocide as one of, it would be the fifth crime under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, along with genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. And this is because what we were gesturing to earlier, that the ICC has jurisdiction over individual criminal responsibility. So that leaves out a whole host of actors that potentially or allegedly commit ecocide crimes. Where does that leave us? We have, of course, we talked about this earlier, the International Court of Justice. And right now going on is an absolutely historic moment where there's been an advisory opinion requested by the UNGA of the International Court of Justice of what is the legal responsibility of state actors when it comes to climate degradation. And this is ongoing. And in fact, the period for contributions for third-party contributions has been extended at the request of states led by Vanuatu. And we have seen also importantly and uniquely with this case, with this advisory opinion request, a new and more diverse array of non-state actors that has been able to participate in the ICJ proceedings. This is an excellent example of how the ICJ in its advisory opinion capacity can work as a force of good. We still have a lot of folks left out, though, in terms of liability. And this is where I would point instructionally to some of the regional mechanisms, particularly the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which has found criminal liability on behalf of corporations, which has also issued an advisory opinion that the ICJ, if it does the right thing, would follow, declaring ecocide a crime with a definition thereof. And the European Court on Human Rights has also heard similar cases. This doesn't cover the whole world, though. There are regions that are left out from both of those. There's a lot of domestic activity, even in my home jurisdiction, the United States, we've seen that. But of course, this becomes a patchwork quilt, right? And so, and that maybe leads to jurisprudence that could be conflicting. It might lead to inefficiencies. And so there is also a moment and there's championship of an international climate court itself that would have jurisdiction potentially over all of these type of actors, state, non-state, individual, over an array of environmental crimes. And this is also wrapped up, I think, or interrelated with International Anti-Corruption Court. They're not mutually exclusive, and there's a lot of interconnectivity between the two. So I hope that answers your question, and I will try to put in the chat the advisory report issued by that expert group for the ICC, because it is instructional.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And now we'll go to the other two questions, and I'll direct those to Jonathan. Again, we have to be very brief because we're over time, but that is how can we enforce international law, particularly when the powerful countries are violating it?
That is the key question before us right now, and that requires a formal, very focused follow-on conversation that deals with UN reform, that deals with the power of the exercise of middle power countries, that deals with the fact that the great majority of nations of the world are in nuclear weapons-free zones, that shows that when you take polls of people's priorities, they actually want to work together, that recognizes that the business community works together, that the scientific community works together, that the cultural creative community works together, and that the coordination of all of these voices has not taken place, and thus there is a derogation of international law that we're seeing presently. So this is the task before us, and it is worthy of a very focused conversation because there is no simple answer that we've come up with yet. And thus we slide toward destruction, and thus we have to move forward working together and put our best minds together. We are at a Westphalia moment in human society. Westphalia was founded, that created the modern state because people were slaughtering themselves in massive numbers over whose definition of Jesus' love was better in Central Europe. Imagine the madness of that. And out of that, we had to create the modern world. And now we've created nation states which have become idolatrous in themselves, as if they are the end in themselves. It's the security of people that is the purpose of the state. And the security of people cannot be obtained unless we have a cooperative security system based on human rights and the rule of law. How we get there, that is too serious a question for a blithe answer from somebody with my limited intelligence and wisdom. It's going to take all of us together to work on that one.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. As the moderator of this panel, I'll definitely take this up after this webinar with the co-organisers, World Academy of Arts and Sciences. I know that the organisations that are involved in the Law Not War initiative would be very interested in being part of that dialogue. And we'll definitely work, because I think you're quite correct. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to look for. It's one of the key issues of today, and it does require a lot of cooperation, engagement, and constructive thought and advocacy. So definitely we'll follow up on that. Thank you. And just before I pass the chair back to Liberato, and a big thank you to the speakers for contributing your thoughts and ideas, which was so rich that we did go beyond time. I'm just going to share the platform which Unfold Zero is releasing today, the platform on common and human security and nuclear abolition, in particular for the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, which is September 26th. You can see it on the Unfold Zero website, and then on the Unfold Zero website, just under Get Involved, is 26th of September, and there you'll see a bit of an outline to it. Of course, the objective of the elimination of nuclear weapons was the very first resolution of the United Nations. The fact that we haven't been able to move on that and that countries are still relying on nuclear weapons is because they're still relying on the threat or use of force. And the threat or use of nuclear weapons is part of that. So implementing the ideas we've been talking about this panel are very much part of the Nuclear Weapons Elimination Day. And there's some resources there, a call on governments, a social media action, and an appeal which you can all become engaged in. Again, Unfold Zero website is where you can find this. Once again, a huge thank you to the panelists for engaging and for the richness of this panel. A thank you to the organisers for letting us go on a little bit over time. And I now pass the panel, the session back to Liberato.
Thank you, Alan, for excellent moderation. And thank you. I share with you a big thanks to our three panelists for excellent interventions. Three quick announcements. People have asked whether they will be able to view this webinar again because they are leaving early. Before you leave early, look at the upper left corner on your screen. It says YouTube. Make sure you copy and paste on your laptops or smartphones the website, because at any time you can view this entire webinar again on YouTube. Upper left corner on your screen, it says YouTube. Make sure you copy and paste. I'm sorry, on your laptops or smartphones what I'm saying. Website, because at any time you can view this entire webinar again on YouTube. If someone is viewing the YouTube, your sound is repeating. Thank you very much. So let's move on to the next panel, panel 3, Sustainability for People and the Planet. And I'm so pleased to bring to you a good friend of old and of current, Dr. Christopher Ferguson, the international visiting professor at this time at the Universidad Reformada in Barranquilla, Colombia. Previously the General Secretary of the World Council of Reformed Churches. Chris, you have the screen.
Thank you very much. Levi, could you guide me? Has our time frame been shortened because of the other speakers? Are we needing to still end at the same time?
We are 20 minutes pushed back by time. So it's a plea.
So I'm going to, through you, I will request our speakers that they will, if they could get as close to 5 minutes as possible. That's not a very fair request, but given the time taken by the other panels whose input we did enjoy, I think we will have to bear the consequences and cut our speakers' time. So apologies to that. We are moving into a panel addressing the core question of sustainability for people and planet. The hard news is that the current world order is driven by a militarized, patriarchal, neoliberal market capitalist system. And it constitutes a massive threat to the life of people and planet. Fundamentally, the entwinement of economy and militarization is such that without fundamental changes to the current militarized economy, the multi-crisis we are facing will destroy the conditions for sustainable life. Peace with justice for people and planet, from a moral perspective, recovers overcoming the exploitative economic system and finding non-military solutions to the global contest for dominance as empires battle for hegemony. There's questions that can only be met by moral will and determination. A moral and ethical imperative to defend life as the basis for any future pact for the future for people and planet. It requires not only the putting in place systems of law and human rights, but dismantling systems and structures that sow poverty, inequality, and death, and destroy creation itself. From a moral and spiritual perspective, I contend the only road to sustainability is social, economic, ecological, and gender justice, whose fruit will be peace, nurtured by economies of life. These kinds of economic changes involve immediately embracing solutions that are being proposed from countries in the global south, like debt swaps for environmental sustainability, radical demilitarization of the global economy. Sustainability requires a pact for the future, which demilitarizes the economy and cares for creation. The hard news is that any future pact, any future agreement must focus on economic transformation for sustainability and must directly confront economic and political injustices. Sustainability requires financing for transformational change, including restructuring of the Security Council for just social and ecological relations, and focusing on human and ecological well-being for planetary flourishing beyond economic and military hegemony. Unless the economic and political question is squarely addressed, there will be no sustainability. The current world order must be dismantled, and in its place, there must be systems and structures that serve life. There's a provocative but important perspective of moral accountability coming from my faith community. And with that introduction to the question of sustainability, I'd ask our first speaker to take the microphone, Amanda Ellis, Senior Director, Global Partnerships of the Julie Ann Wrigley Global Futures Lab, among her other responsibilities at the Arizona State University. Amanda, please. And I'm very sorry to have you stay as close to 5 minutes as you can. I apologize greatly.
That's good.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's great to be part of this important panel. And congratulations to CoNGO on 75 years of incredible global impact. So let's dive right in. Why is this such an important decade? We know that we're seeing more extremes in terms of a whole range of temperatures, extreme weather events, increased deaths from heat, and we know that that is sparking insecurity as well. So it's time for us to move from a paradigm of nation security, which is really old-fashioned now that we humans are a big presence on a small planet, and thinking about privileging human security. The climate crisis knows no borders. Important too to recognize the interplay between conflict, climate, and issues like international energy and food supplies and migration crises. There are estimates that we could have as many as 2 billion displaced people by the end of the century as a result of these interplays. Now, here in Hawaii, the Maui fires are an example close to home of the impact that the climate crisis is having. And we know what the cause is. Back in 1856, Eunice Newton Foote was the first scientist to make the connection between increased levels of CO2 and global warming. We're now at 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is the hottest in 100,000 years. And we've entered this new age of the Anthropocene, where scientists say we are the single biggest impact on our planet and on our planet's future. Now, we know that the majority of warming comes around 3/4 from burning fossil fuels. We know too that there is an active disinformation campaign from oil and gas, and it's very important for us to ensure that we combat that with scientific reality and sustainable action. So what are universities doing for human security? We at the ASU Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Lab are working across 5 spaces. First of all, learning and education. Second of all, research and discovery. Third, solutions. Our Walton Solutions Center works with the private sector and with entities like cities, engaging more broadly through a whole range of media, including the arts, and then partnering broadly with networks around the world, including CoNGO and the World Academy of Art and Science. We have a Center for Emergency Management and Homeland Security on campus. We're also very committed to ensuring that we use our tools as a university and our connections to create a future in which well-being is attainable for all. We're delighted to be number 1 in sustainable impact for the US and number 10 globally. So just a couple of things I'd like to highlight before I finish. First of all, a training project with the Interparliamentary Union and their 179 member countries, where we have a global campaign for Parliaments for the Planet, where parliamentarians can share good practices in creating legislation to turn their national commitments from the UN Framework Climate Change Convention into legislation and local action, where we'll have a number of videos which will be available to all on different aspects of the climate crisis. Education for those who have no access to the internet. And unfortunately, some 2 billion people worldwide still do not have access to the internet. One of our brilliant women professors, Dr. Laura Hossman, has created a solar-powered educational learning library, Solar Spell, to ensure that those who do not have a direct connection to the internet can still access, through a solar hotspot, educational materials. And lastly, our We Empower UN SDG Challenge, an example of a global partnership launched by the UN Secretary General and the then President of the World Bank back in 2018. And some examples here: organic sustainable food systems with indigenous farmers, access to water, and finally, we have our own scientist based here in Hawaii, Dr. Greg Asner, who in the last couple of years has mapped all of the world's tropical shallow coral reefs, so important for storm surges, and is now building the world's largest coral restoration facility on the Big Island of Hawaii, and then mapping global emissions as part of Climate Trace, tracking real-time atmospheric climate emissions. Greg, as the Chief Science Officer for Carbon Mapper, is helping to document emissions at point source from both methane and CO2. So just a few of the ways in which we as universities can engage through our 5 dimensions to help support sustainability for people and planet, and indeed create just and regenerative global futures. Thank you.
Amanda, I'm a fan. Not only did you get to the heart of the matter, you did it in less than 5 minutes. That's amazing. And we appreciate the passion, and that the universities have to take on a role that's transformational. And you're showing that that clarity of how each from our own spot can act. We can move quickly now with great thanks to you, Amanda, to Alexandra Gosens-Ishii, the program coordinator for Environment, Climate Change and Biodiversity with Soka Gakkai International. Thank you. Please, Alexandra, if you could make your presentation also briefly, we appreciate it profoundly.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So I'm Alexandra from Soka Gakkai International. Many thanks to CoNGO for inviting me to share some reflections on the occasion of its 75th anniversary. It seems my connection is unstable, and so I hope that you can hear me, but I'll be brief. So as part of this session on sustainability for people and planet, and against the backdrop of everything that we've heard, the SDG review process, what has happened in the past, what is coming in the future in terms of meetings, I wanted to share maybe 3 points that relate to the perspective from which I am engaging, and it's the multilateral environmental processes, especially the Climate COP, the Human Rights Council, and then I wanted to reflect on the last point relating to inner and outer sustainability. So for the first point, briefly, I wanted to come back on this historic adoption of the UNGA resolution recognizing the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment in July last year. And in October before that, October 2021, the resolution had been adopted also by the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And so it was historic because the core group of states that really showed strong leadership to bring this forward was amazing, but nothing would have been possible also without the relentless campaigning of a global coalition of around 2,000 civil society organizations, indigenous people, social and faith movements, and local communities. And these really carried this campaign over more than several decades, actually. What I think is also that gives me hope, let's say, is that this global coalition a few weeks ago was actually awarded the highest UN Human Rights Prize. The ceremony will take place in December, but I think what that means for me is 2 things. Is that first, it really highlights the essential role of civil society, indigenous peoples organizations in really placing people and planet at the forefront of policymaking. And I think this message really has significance and will resonate with many environmental human rights defenders who are striving to safeguard civic space. And also the second part of it for me is that it really shows the paramount importance of the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and that something in terms of policymaking is deeply changing, of course, against the background of everything that we've said so far. So, you know, the invisible barriers, the inequality, the economic system, etc. But there is also this trend and deep current of the ocean, if I could compare it to that, where the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is people start to realize that, yes, this is my right, and in many ways, I will fight for it. Since then, it has been acknowledged in other environmental processes, so at COP27, in the newly adopted Global Biodiversity Framework, also in the very recent general comment of the Committee of the Rights of the Child that's focusing on environment and climate change. So really, it's really spreading. And I think that's something, of course, implementation is another thing, and that's comes now. But I think it's something that gives me hope. And there are many other efforts that have been talked about, all the requests for advisory opinions, efforts to get an additional protocol in Europe to the European Convention of Human Rights to focus on this right to a healthy environment. The second point, briefly, I'll be very brief on that one, is we all talked previously of the importance of centering human rights and why we should. And I think that's fantastic. And I think this is something that as a global coalition in both the biodiversity process and climate process, we have working groups focusing on bringing human rights to these processes, really to consider the nexus, the interconnection, and to bring human rights as a hook to really embody respect for dignity of life as an ethical call, really. And so there are many ways in which we are trying to find hooks where human rights should really be part of that policy processes. And so to conclude my last point, a brief reflection on inner and outer sustainability, and that everything starts with one person, also been mentioned by many people. Recently, as part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, we had a webinar and a meeting about the levers of change and what motivates change. And you have the traditional levers, material incentives, rules, regulations, information, but also really what will change, what will enable behavior change are actually emotions. And also the number one thing that came out of the studies was what helps people make change is others' behaviors. So what we see and perceive in what others are doing is really important. So it's important for us in what we embody as well. And so I guess my last point, part of that last point, I would like to quote Christiana Figueres. I think it's really a beautiful quote. And she says that the climate crisis, the nature crisis, the inequality crisis, the food crisis, all share the same deep root. And we've discussed that. So she says extractivism based on extrinsic principles. This extractivism does not only deplete the planet, the very soil of the earth itself, it also depletes our human souls. In order to take forward the food and necessary work to regenerate our planet and societies, to turn around our economic systems so that we can see the positive changes within with our own eyes, we must also regenerate what is internally palpable to each of us. And I'll conclude on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And again, the firm pointing to the structural transformation that's needed, the spiritual and personal assumption of responsibility. Well said, Alexandra. And we'll move on to now what I understand, Levy, will be a video presentation by Beatrice Schultes, the founder and president of the Indigenous Peoples Ancestral Spiritual Council. And we'll make space for Beatrice's prepared presentation.
Good morning, New York. Permit me to acknowledge the powers of creation and the constant presence of the ancestors that are guiding me. Also, I would like to express my appreciation to CoNGO and its president, Levi Bautista, for the opportunity he is giving me to contribute to this event, and to Chris Ferguson for moderating this panel. We as organizations and people in general must come up with the required steps to secure humanity's well-being and peace. Concerning sustainability in the early 90s, when this term became known, several indigenous spiritual guides met to analyze the meaning of the term sustainable development. We concluded that it meant exactly what indigenous people have always been doing with their environment and available resources. It was also concluded that it is much better to say developing sustainability with the resources available. That was our view. But unfortunately, other cultures decided that sustainable development for them meant using the resources of others and in the process contributing to their impoverishment. We indigenous people have been the caretakers of the environment since time immemorial and against all odds. We know how to live in community with nature and use the resources in a sustainable manner. Also, our people know how to adapt to changes imposed by nature or human activities. Our ancestors and current generations warned repeatedly that as global citizens, we are not going in the right direction. The peace of many people and communities throughout the world has been disrupted because of the greediness of those that appropriate themselves of resources that do not belong to them. Definitively, those that most promote sustainability are not the ones that practice it. Many conflicts and wars take place because of the plundering of natural resources. Now we are in a state of urgency, facing different types of crises, and to find a way out, we must all together challenge decision makers and politicians that continue to do business as usual. We must defy the greediness of some sectors of society. Currently, society is facing unprecedented challenges such as persistent and growing poverty and climate change, which leads to other sufferings and migration. Some countries are rich in resources, but ravaged by poverty. They are forced to call for aid that is being provided, if approved, by the same countries that are looting them. Is this a viable solution? The well-being of all humanity is vital and requires that we take unprecedented, exceptional, and innovative actions. Natural resources should be managed in a sustainable and respectful manner in each country and community by the people themselves. It should not be allowed to harm other people and countries to obtain natural resources. All the agreements that benefit some countries and subject others to accept derisory profits must be cancelled. Review of international trade agreements need to be eliminated because of inequalities. Reduce inequalities also within and among countries. Step by step, we must work more closely together to build peace. Urgency demands that solutions are implemented within a new approach of distribution of wealth. But are we ready for that? Are those that have been looting others ready? Of course, a better global distribution of wealth will trigger some resistance, but fortunately, it seems that increased consciousness within and among various sectors of society is a reality. We, the people, have the power in our hands to secure humanity's well-being. We must influence for change within the UN, governments, education systems, our organizations, and other areas where we may be active. Individually and collectively, we must start believing in the power we have, use our minds, act, and produce change. As CoNGO organizations, we must unite, but really unite, join forces and act to produce the required change for the achievement of sustainability and peace. Thank you very much.
Great thanks to Beatriz for the sharing of wisdoms, the different approaches to knowledge and understanding, and to enriching our shift of point of view from the indigenous perspective and embracing the kind of unity and spiritual determination that transformation will require. Luisa Romero Munez from the Kofi Annan Foundation, a change maker, another young and important voice for us. Please, Luisa, adelante.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. Thanks to CoNGO and Liberato for this invitation and to Christopher for moderating this panel. I'm Luisa Romero from Cauca, Colombia, and I would like to share my personal experience with you about sustainability of people and planet. My region, Cauca, in Colombia, has been one of the regions most affected by the Colombian armed conflict, which left us with 9 million victims with so many wounds and problems that still need to be solved. In 2016, a peace agreement was signed in Colombia, and this important moment was my motivation to co-found a local organization to contribute to peace building called Get Up and Go Colombia. The organization aims to transform former war territories into cultural and touristic destinations by empowering the communities most affected by the armed conflict. We support local communities by building their capacity on topics such as sustainable tourism, social entrepreneurship, and bilingualism. In this way, we build with them a tourism that make visible their voices and contribute to peace building. An example of this effort is a project we developed in a rural area in Cauca called El Tambo, where the community replaced voluntarily illegal crops and started sustainable tourism as a way of living and taking care of the environment. Where you used to see illegal crops, now cacao is growing, and now you can enjoy a cacao tour with a flavor of peace. In this work of almost 7 years, we work along with indigenous communities, victims and former combatants, young people, and international volunteers. We also opened a peace center and a cafe called Tuspa, where all the goods for sale are produced by the communities affected by the armed conflict. By being a Kofi Annan change maker, I have learned that healthy and sustainable societies are based on 3 pillars: peace and security, sustainable development, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. This cannot be achieved one without the other. This has been a powerful reminder that our efforts in advancing the sustainable development goals must go hand in hand with promoting peace, justice, and inclusivity. While my country has taken significant steps towards peace and security with the signing of the peace agreement, it is a harsh reality to see that children are still being recruited by illegal armed groups. This issue shows the urgent need for prevention and security initiatives, particularly in post-conflict territories. The peace agreement has brought hope for a more stable and secure Colombia. However, its full implementation faces challenges, especially in regions where poverty and lack of opportunities persist. In these vulnerable areas, illegal armed groups often exploit the absence of state presence, offering youth an alternative. To address this complex issue, it is crucial to focus on 2 key elements: prevention and development. Prevention efforts must include community-based programs that raise awareness about the risk of recruitment and offer positive alternatives for young people in different sectors. Also, rural areas require investments in infrastructure, healthcare, and economic opportunities. When communities have access to education, healthcare, and employment, they become less susceptible to the influence of illegal armed groups. Sustainable development fosters a sense of belonging and hope for a brighter future. Furthermore, the collaboration among government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and local communities is essential. Together, we can create a protected environment, particularly for children, fostering conditions for long-term peace and stability. I have worked with many young peace builders from Colombia and from other countries affected by armed conflicts. We all have realized how difficult it is to access funds to create this type of programs for sustainable development, peace, and security. I would suggest creating initiatives that support local grassroots organizations, and especially the ones led by young people who are the ones that know the best these territories. I believe that now is the moment to build back better from a perspective of inclusion and an opportunity to create opportunities for people who are showing that it's possible to create a new reality. My recommendation would be to listen to the youth, not to answer them immediately, but to understand the challenges we face and co-create with us effective solutions. As Kofi Annan once said, have confidence in the young people, give them a chance and they will surprise you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for the strong, clear examples of youth leadership and what we referred to earlier of creating economies of life from below, substituting the conflict over land to making the land work through the vision of young people, and also for confronting directly the threats to life that armed conflict represents for people. And so we are hearing a growing call for youth participation, and we are already seeing great leadership. So thank you, Luisa. Gracias. I need to now check with these excellent presentations with Levy, with Liberato, if we have time for any questions or whether our time is done.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris, for an excellent moderation. There's only one question. There's one question earlier from Grove Harris, but that was for Rebecca. But let me see, just to give.
Can I just check with Lucy if she has harvested any questions?
Yes. Can you,
Hi, Levy. There is another question from Nankers Warsing from UN Mauritius, but I think it was also related to the previous panel. I don't know if you want us to ask now.
Just give voice to the question so that it's recorded.
It is it not a system where NGOs are working hard to promote UN SDGs and world peace, but being destroyed by some irresponsible states?
That's a good question. And let me add one more. A comment from Alison Brown. We definitely need UN reform. Having a Security Council member which uses its veto power to protect its war of aggression against a neighboring country shows how messed up the current system is and how impotent the UN is in face of wars. But how? But how could this happen? And then last question on chat. Is it not, that was already read by Dr. Takagi. I think there's nothing directly addressed to the panelists on your panel, Chris.
Okay, well, thank you. And I do see that someone was calling a question to me, or not a question, making a comment. And I would, about whether or not, basically my comments about capitalism and economic exploitation was on the other hand not giving space for the due and near criticism of authoritarianism, dictatorial government, corruption, and so on. And the basic point is we have talked about all these things, but I think we have heard constantly that the really, in a certain sense, the elephant in the room is confronting an economic system that's actually designed, as someone mentioned about extractivism, to destroy the very conditions of life. So I just would add that we cannot dodge the economic question, whether we call the system capitalism or any other exploitative system of economics that puts profit before people and planet. So thank you, Levy, for entrusting this to us. Very sorry, I didn't want in my comments to say that I thank all the speakers. I want to thank also Lucy Tagaki for her follow-up. She'll be doing the reporter's job of passing on the comments, and Maria Real, who had joined us as another support to our process, but now has had to go and look after her grandkids, which is a wonderful task of care as well. So over to you, Levy.
Thank you to all of you again, panelists, rapporteurs. I'm not giving time to our lead rapporteurs. I hope that they are ready to come up with a raw report, a report back from what our rapporteurs in the panels and what our lead rapporteurs, Cyril Ritchie, the Congo First Vice President based in Geneva, and Janani Ramanathan, Secretary General of the World Academy of Art and Science based in India. We hear what they privilege as things that they have heard and highlight, and gathering the reports from the panelists, from the rapporteurs, we will be producing an outcome document and will be sent to you in due time when it's ready for sharing. Cyril and Janani, you have the screen.
Thank you, Levi. I'll be starting off. Today's CoNGO 75th anniversary webinar on peace, human security, and sustainability for people on the planet has been yet another enormous success. The inputs from the speakers were of a very high level, and the amount of material that we have gathered, and with inputs also from the rapporteurs from the different panels, will all appear in due course in the final report. All we can do today, firstly myself and then Janani, will be to give you a few highlights, particularly, in my view, some very important quotes that we have to take away. There are takeaways in every speech that we've heard today. Indeed, particularly, as was said right at the very beginning, that we do not linger in empty words. And that's why so many speakers have emphasized the role of people and of people's organizations in moving beyond empty words that we too often hear from governments. Let me, on behalf of CoNGO, particularly say how glad and proud we have been to have WAAS as a co-sponsor, and it has been excellent to work with them in the framework of the Programme of Human Security for All. Many people emphasized the interlinkages between these different concepts, that peace is an essential condition for human security, and human security is an essential condition for peace. Indeed, that without both peace and human security, there can be no sustainability. We were reminded of how many conflicts there are in the world. There are perhaps more conflicts now than any recent period. Some of them are longer and deadlier. Ukraine is an example, Yemen is another, the Democratic Republic of Congo is yet another. And as we were told, including by an ambassador, the UN has never been weaker. And yet we absolutely need the UN, and we need a UN that conforms to what its charter specifies. Remember, the charter was not invented by some bureaucrats. The charter was written by governments, and it is up to governments to implement the charter, whether or not they are members of the Security Council and of the permanent membership. And for the purpose of this seminar, of this webinar, looking forward to the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future 2024, we are a part of the preparations for that, and a part of the input which will be contained in the reports of all the webinars, of which this is the fourth, and there are two more to come. Many people underlined that the Summit of the Future is itself the best chance we have for a new vision that will put the UN back on track, that there's need for more competence, more solidarity, more inclusion, and more vertical solidarity towards future generations.
You're muted, Cyril.
Oh, sorry, that must have been an accident. We were particularly glad, I think, to hear about the work of the UN Peacebuilding Commission and the steps being made to strengthen it as an essential part of the UN structure. We were reminded by many that all the crises we currently know, COVID, war, climate, water, are all impediments to achieving the SDGs, but that the very fact of their existence requires that we achieve the SDGs. And the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda is something we must all support, work for, and persuade governments to act on, without which we will not achieve the SDGs. Two or three other points before I hand over to Janani. I loved one or two of the very pertinent quotations. If you can't measure sustainability, you can't manage it. And you can't improve it. A second quote, going back a long time, remember your humanity and forget the rest. Many people have criticized the current state of the multilateral system, which is, as one man said, unraveling, and therefore progress towards the SDGs has stalled. It is the policies that are out there that we need to mobilize. And as one speaker said, existing policies could solve 1/3 of the world's problems if we could identify them well and in good time. And several speakers in various ways underlined how NGOs as people's institutions have a critical role to close the gap that exists with the SDGs and the gaps that are appearing in the multilateralism, because NGOs, which are representing people's grassroots knowledge, understand what works and what might work if only it were given the chance to be implemented. Two other points. Several references were made to the absolute importance of international law, of applying international law, of implementing international law, and of giving international law the place that it merits in the center of the future world. I think I have to close my highlights now. I want to say that there is a wonderful remark by one speaker in referring to Congo, and this its 75th anniversary year, that Congo is a connector. That's a very good term indeed. And in the chat box, there was a request for Congo to continue these dialogues. I think in closing, I can say, yes, that indeed is Congo's well-known role, and we certainly intend to carry this forward together with our relationship with, pressure on, and setting an example to the governments in the UN system. The UN system is what we need, and we therefore need governments to implement the commitments that they have made. And now I yield to Janani.
Thank you, sir. Some of the points that we heard today were, one is NGOs have come a long way from being observers in the background to becoming a major force today. We now have a shared vision and a greater consciousness that together we can do more, transcending all kinds of borders. The need for human security is highlighted by the fact that 6 out of 7 people feel insecure today. Insecurity is in many areas at many levels. Our insecurities must be tackled together comprehensively. We need to empower people. Human security starts with people and what it means for us to be safe and secure in our homes, our jobs, our communities, our environment. There are serious challenges that we face. The list is very long. However, every crisis is an opportunity, and radical solutions can be relatively easily implemented or accepted due to the pressure of the very situation. Speakers underlined the link between peace and development. We need to divert our funding from preparing for war to preparing for peace. The SDGs, they represent a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity. There are gaps between where we are and where we need to be. The SDG scorecard shows us that just 12% of the SDGs are on track. A lot of our development serves half or less than half of the global population, but there are also some shining examples that we need to build upon on our pathway to 2030. And problems come when from what we don't know and what we don't understand. But there are a number of solutions. Science is on our side. The SDG gaps can be closed. In fact, we do have the means to close more than 100% of the SDG gaps. And what we need for that is knowledge sharing and policies. And these policies need to be rolled out across the world. And NGOs have a critical role to play in closing this gap. And as speaker said, we are at a Westphalia moment, and to rise to the occasion, we need radical organizational and cultural changes. And there was one comment which said, we need creativity and courage to create the change. Organizational change includes strengthening of multilateral organizations, better global regulations, better management of global commons, and involving more young people in decision making. And cultural change is about greater inclusion, tolerance, human rights, a greater commitment to ethics, and a positive attitude towards our planet and future generations. We also need increased trust between ourselves, between nations, between generations. And the very essence of human security is an intimate reflection of who we are. And I'm repeating the Einstein-Russell quote, which Cyril shared with us, because I think it's so important. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. Absolutely outstanding was one of the comments in the chat window in response to today's discussion, and I agree with that. And as one of our panelists today said, the best is ahead of us. However, our future depends on the choices that we make today. Thank you, and over to you, Liberato.
Thank you very much, Cyril and Janani, for the raw report back, substantive as they already are. Now we are coming to a close. I think we will do well. We were set back by 20 minutes earlier. I don't think we will be closing longer than necessary. It's my usual thank you to all, but like what Cyril said, this is what we do as CoNGO, leveraging our convening capacity. We will convene you again on October 27 for the webinar number 5. And this time it will be focused on United Nations and NGO relations, enhancing multilateralism, protecting NGO access, civil space, and democratic discourse. Now that civil space is under threat. It's shrinking because of undemocratic practices. So we invite you on October 27. Related to that, this afternoon at the Church Center right here where I am in New York, there will be a discussion on the capture of the multilateral system and the so-called multi-stakeholderism and what is at stake at the Summit of the Future. This is being organized by many groups, including the member of CoNGO, FIAN, the Global South, the Transnational Institute, the Friends of the Earth, and so much more. Again, concerned about that shrinking space. And then on September 13, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights here in New York will be convening a discussion on the civil space and how to enhance participation through strengthened partnerships. That's also part of their celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We share a 75th with the UDHR. Thank you very much from CoNGO to our co-organizers, World Academy of Art and Science, Human Security for All, including the UN Trust Fund for Human Security, and to our webinar co-sponsors for having donated financial and in-kind support. Armenian Assembly of America. These are all members of CoNGO. The Congressional Black Caucus Institute, CGFNS International, the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church, the organization that pays my work, CoNGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity, Generations United, the International Association of Applied Psychology, the Mulchand and Parpati Tadani Foundation, the Fundación Internacional René May, Pan-Pacific and Southeast Asia Women's Association, and Staff United Fund. So thank you to all our panelists, our moderators, our rapporteurs and participants. Let's give a round of applause to our interpretation team. It's a voluntary work and it's a hard work. John Salinas for Spanish, Abad Arabat for French, Murad Mujahid and Fasali Mohammed for Arabic. And our co-sponsors and the members of the planning team, a number of them, if not all of them, are on screen. And to CoNGO leaders, Cyril in Geneva, Martina Gredler in Vienna, who is also here, Mondia Bangsba, who is here with us from Bangkok, Hero and Alex from the Soka Gakkai International members of the board, and Dorothy Davis of the Congressional Black Caucus Institute for laboring with us to bring you this webinar. And to Tuyomi, who made us look more professional and better on screen. Tuyomi is our CoNGO Media and Communications Consultant. So without much further ado, let me call on my co-organizer lead, Dr. Gary Jacobs.
Well, Liberato, thank you so much for calling on me, but I think so much has been said and there's been so much to observe. I would only like to say thank you, to all the sponsors who have helped organize this, to a fantastic group of speakers, and to our active audience that has fed us with important questions. And I'm as eagerly looking forward to the report of the rapporteurs, who have the challenge of taking all the meat that we've heard, all the substance that we've heard. I'd only like to say that this has been a really energizing experience, focusing on the issues, directly on issues that need to be addressed, and focusing to a very large extent on solutions that can be implemented. And I think we're all left with, I'm left with the voice of the youth, because what we really need, we need a strengthening of the civil society organizations. We need the work of CoNGO and organizations like this that can create a voice from below to really generate the support and the pressure for change at the national and the global level. And I think we have to do better in mobilizing the next generation and their voice and getting them further engaged. And I'm saying that on behalf of the Academy and World University Consortium and our Human Security Campaign. Met wonderful people today with inspiring ideas. And on behalf of our campaign, I would like to say we welcome the opportunity to work further with you, with CoNGO, and with all the organizations that have been present here in our shared commitment to really making things happen now. And that voice of determination, the energy and the determination in spite of the difficulties and even the confidence that we can do this, I think that's the greatest asset that comes out of this meeting. So let's do it together.
So Gary, before the rest leaves, let me remind you, save the chat, because we've allowed you to save the chat because there's such a robust exchange of ideas, and we will definitely follow up with you. We have your email addresses from your registration. Rest assured, we will be in communication with you. I'm not receiving royalties from the movie Oppenheimer, but I invite you to read Gary Jacobs' review of the movie Oppenheimer. Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer were founders of the World Academy of Art and Science. And so that's a plug because of the strong emphasis in this webinar for nuclear disarmament, and Oppenheimer's story is important to be heard. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, have a good afternoon, have a good rest of the day wherever you are. Join us next time, October 27. Till then, be safe, be well. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Liberato. Terrific job. Thank you.